Welcome in the journey of time. Tonight, we'll open another chapter of history, a tale waiting quietly in the dark. Perhaps you're resting in bed, or simply letting the echoes of the past keep you company. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment if you like. I always love knowing the places these stories would reach. If this gentle journeys through time bring you comfort and rest, I'd be honored if you like and subscribe. Now, let's step into the story. Before the first oaken crown settled upon a king's brow, before the first stone circle echoed with chant, the forest dreamed. It dreamed of a sentience woven from root and ray, from sap and soil. From that primeval dream he stirred, not born, but budded, not delivered with a cry, but emerging with the silent, inexorable push of a fern through leaf litter. He was the answering whisper to the woodland's need for a voice, the embodied will to guard the eternal cycle of decay and regrowth. He opened eyes which held the dappled light of clearings, and breathed a first breath that was the very mist over bog myrtle. He was the green man, and his kingdom was the wild, untamed heart of the world. This is his story, and the story of those whose lives became entangled with his verdant, ancient fate, the carver and the crone. The air in Brother Killian's tiny cell clung with a damp chill, thick with the smell of parchment dust, beeswax, and his own weary sweat. His fingers, stained dark with walnut ink, cramped around the handle of his mallet. Before him, a block of pale English oak, intended to become a corbel for the new monastery's cloister, awaited its fate. The abbot desired a likeness of St. Matthew, but the wood to Cillian whispered of other things. Cillian was not like the other brothers. A convert from the old beliefs, the Paganoct, his faith in the new God was a fragile graft upon a deep-rooted native stock. He found the Latin Psalms less resonant than the memory of wind in high, lonely places. His talent for carving was a blessing to the monastery, but his heart remained a divided kingdom. The block of oak possessed a knot, a dark world eye near its top. Each time Cillian's chisel approached it, his tools seemed to blunt, his focus to splinter. That night, under the guttering light of a tallow dip, his frustration crested. He laid aside the sketch of the evangelist. A compulsion, wild and sudden, seized him. He began to carve, not with planned lines, but with a kind of desperate remembering. His chisel no longer fought the wood. It flowed. It gouged deep sockets around that knot, making it a piercing, somber eye. It peeled back wooden layers to form lips, parted not in saintly benediction, but in a silent, roaring shout. From those lips, from the corners of the mouth, from the very pores of the imagined face, Cillian's tools drew forth tendrils, leaves, vines. They spiraled outward, weaving a thicket of hawthorn, oak, and ivy, until the face itself seemed both the source and the prisoner of the rampant foliage. It was a face of anguish and authority, of fertile life and consuming wilderness. He carved through the night, his back aching, his breath fogging in the cold air, until the first gray light of dawn seeped through his narrow window. He had not created St. Matthew. He had given form to the fear gloss, the green man, a memory from his grandfather's stories, a spirit of the wildwood the priests called demonic. A wave of terror and exhilaration washed over him. This was heresy in solid oak. Yet it felt more sacred, more true than any saint he had ever rendered. "They will burn it," a voice, dry like rustling leaves, spoke from the doorway. Cillian started, his chisel clattering to the stone floor. In the shadows stood the community's oldest inhabitant, a woman named Nessa. She was not a nun, but a lay sister of immense age, who worked in the herb garden. Some whispered she remembered the time before the first Saxon boat touched the shore. Her back was bent, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were the sharp, black color of river stones. "Sister Nessa, it was a mistake," Cillian stammered, moving to throw a cloth over the carving. "A mistake?" She shuffled in, her movement accompanied by the faint scent of turned earth and sage. Her gnarled hand, strong despite its appearance, reached out and traced the leafy mane. Her touch was reverent. "No, boy, this is a remembering, a summoning, perhaps. You have given him a door." Cillian felt a chill unrelated to the morning cold. "Him? It is only wood." Nessa's laugh was a short, dry cough. "Is it? You poured your soul's longing into this grain. You called to the memory of the forest, with hands trained to glorify a foreign god. You think such power goes unanswered?" She fixed him with her dark gaze. "He is not gone, only sleeping." Pushed to the deepest, wildest corners since the axes came and the bell towers rose. But he is the guardian of the turn. Winter cannot hold without his release of spring. He is diminished, not dead. "What have I done?" Cillian whispered, his earlier exhilaration turning to dread. "You have begun a story," Nessa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This face, it is a key, but keys can open us well as lock. There are those who would use such a key not to honor, but to possess, to control the turn of the seasons for their own gain." Who? Men who see land as property, not life. Kings who see forests as timber and hunting preserves, not living entities. There is one, Lord Hereward, the new Saxon Then, to whom the abbot toadies. He hates the deep woods. He fears them. He would drain the marshes and flatten the groves to make pasture for his sheep. If he knew a power yet lingered there, a heart he could perhaps capture or crush. She left the thought hanging. "What must I do?" Cillian asked, the weight of the world seeming to settle on his shoulders. "Hide this, not here. The stones of this place weep with prayers that deny him. You must take it to a place where the old ways still breathe, a place of convergence. Do you know the Knocknundir, the Hill of Oaks?" Cillian nodded, a childhood memory surfacing, a forbidden, wooded hill crowned with ancient, twisted trees, said to be a gateway to the other world. "Take your green man there," Nessa instructed. "Place him facing the east, where the sun rebirths. Let the rain fall on him. Let the wind speak to him. Let the roots know him. Then we shall see if the memory stirs. As the monastery bell tolled for prime, Cillian wrapped the heavy oak head in sacking, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had entered his cell a dutiful, if conflicted, monk. He left it a conspirator in an ancient, dormant magic, carrying a face that watched the world with one knowing, wooden eye. The story of the Green Man, dormant for centuries, had found its first thread in the trembling hands of a carver who remembered. The Heart of the Hill. The journey to Knocknandir was a trespass into Cillian's own past. Leaving the monastery's managed fields behind, the land grew rumpled and secretive. Hawthorn hedges gave way to tangled blackthorn thickets. The well-trodden path dissolved into animal tracks that wound through bracken, still holding the bronze hue of winter. The air changed. The scent of wood smoke and turned earth was replaced by the damp, sweet rot smell of moss, the peppery tang of wild garlic, and the cold, clear scent of running water hidden in deep gullies. Each step away from the monastery felt like shedding a tight, foreign skin. His robes, a rough gray wool, snagged on brambles, marking his passage like a guilty banner. The wrapped carving, bound to his back with rope, seemed to grow heavier, not with physical weight, but with a kind of potent gravity, pulling him deeper into the greenwood. By the time the hill itself loomed before him, a great green dome against a sky the color of a dove's breast, the sun was a pale coin high overhead. The oaks for which it was named were not a regimented forest, but a congregation of elders. Their trunks, thicker than a man's embrace, were gnarred and furrowed like the limbs of slumbering giants. Their branches, still bare but tipped with swollen red buds, knitted a complex lattice against the sky. A profound silence hung here, not empty, but full, a listening quiet. Cillian's breath plumed in the chill. Following Nessa's cryptic instructions, he sought the eastern slope. He found a small natural clearing, a bowl of spongy moss and last year's brown leaves. At its center, a granite stone flecked with mica broke the earth like a gray tooth. It felt like an altar. With numb fingers, he untied the ropes and laid the sacking bundle on the moss. Unwrapping it, the oak face seemed both alien and profoundly familiar in this setting. Under the forest canopy, under the diffuse green-tinted light, it ceased to be a carving. The knot-eye stared into the canopy with a knowing depth the monastery cell could never grant. The leafy tendrils seemed to quiver, ready to merge with the real ivy clinging to a nearby birch. Kneeling, his knees sinking into the damp earth, Cillian lifted the head and propped it against the granite stone, orienting the hollow gaze toward the direction of the rising sun. The act felt ritualistic, a sacrament to a god he had been taught to forsake. He murmured no Latin prayer, but a fragment of an old rhyme his grandfather used to sing at the sowing time. Root hold fast, shoot reach high, under the watchful green eye. He stepped back. Nothing happened. The wind sighed in the high branches. A jay scolded somewhere in the depths. A sense of anticlimax, foolish and heavy, settled on him. Had Nessa's senile fancy and his own misplaced nostalgia led him to this? He was a fool, risking his place in the community for a pagan fairy tale. He decided to wait until the sun began its descent. Sitting on a root, he ate the hard bread and cheese he had brought. The forest's deep peace, initially intimidating, began to seep into him. He watched a spider weave a dewy web between two ferns. He heard the liquid notes of a robin. The monolithic anxiety of monastic life, the constant scrutiny, the guilt, the rigid schedule, began to soften at its edges. Here, time was not marked by bells, but by the slow journey of shadows across the moss. He must have dozed, lulled by the stillness and his own exhaustion. He awoke with a start. The light had changed. The clearing was bathed in the long, low, honey-gold rays of late afternoon. And the carving was different. A thin tendril of living ivy, a vibrant spring-green shoot, had crept across the forest floor. It had touched the oak face. Now it was not merely touching it, it was engaging with it. The young vine curled lovingly around a carved wooden tendril, blending the artifice with the authentic so perfectly Killian could not tell where one ended and the other began. More incredibly, around the base of the carving, where the oak met the moss, tiny emerald-green shoots of wood sorrel and dog's mercury had sprung up in a perfect, vibrant circle, a living halo. But the true wonder was the face itself. The wood, which in his cell had been pale and dry, now gleamed with a subtle internal dampness, like bark after rain. The features seemed softer, less anguished, more contemplative. And the not-eye? Killian leaned closer, his heart a drum in his throat. Deep within that dark whirl, a pinprick of light glimmered. Not a reflection of the setting sun, but a cool, green, internal luminescence, comparable to the foxfire sometimes seen on rotting stumps in the deepest dark. A presence filled the clearing. It was not a person, not a shape. It was a quality, the feeling of being watched by the land itself. The air grew richer, smelling of crushed fern, rich loam, and the potent sap of awakening trees. The silence became a hum, a vibration felt in the marrow rather than heard by the ear. From the depths of the oaken woods, a figure emerged. He did not walk so much as he unfolded from the landscape. One moment, there was a thicket of holly. The next, the holly leaves seemed to rearrange themselves into a cloak of deepest green over broad, sloping shoulders. His hair was a mass of moss and fine, twisting vines, threaded with early white wood anemones. His skin was not like human skin, but resembled the dappled, textured bark of a young birch, smooth in places, beautifully scarred in others. His eyes held the same cool, green luminescence that now flickered in the carving's wooden eye. He was immense, taller than any man, yet he moved with a fluid, silent grace that spoke of roots knowing every stone in the soil. He stood before the stone, looking down at his own likeness. Then he turned that unfathomable gaze upon Killian. The monk fell to his knees, not in worship, but in sheer, overwhelming recognition. This was no demon. This was the soul of the place, the essence of the turning year given form. The stories were true. The green man opened his mouth. When he spoke, his voice was not a single sound, but a chorus. The rustle of countless leaves, the chuckle of a hidden stream, the deep groan of old timber in the wind. The words formed in Killian's mind more than in his ears. You remember. It was an acknowledgement, a question, and a profound relief. Killian could only nod, tears he did not understand warming his cold cheeks. The stone sleep was long, the chorus voice sighed, a sound like wind through a valley. The paths were forgotten. He placed a hand, fingers long and strong, like gnarled roots, upon the carved head. The living ivy flared brighter, and the circle of sorrel at its base seemed to pulse with light. This is a good remembering, a sharp seed to break the frost. He turned his full attention to Killian. But the winter in the hearts of men is a deeper cold. It seeks to make the world a bare field, a silent field. The green eyes glinted. You have awoken the memory. Now you are part of the story, the carver, the key-bearer. What must I do? Killian whispered. The same question he had asked Nessa, now directed at the heart of the mystery itself. The green man intoned, his voice grave. You have opened a door for me, but your act has also sounded a note in the world. Others will have heard it, those who fear the wild, those who would own the turn. He looked toward the south, where the lands of Lord Hereward lay. The balance is fragile. The spring is a tide that must be allowed to flow. It cannot be dammed by stone walls or greedy hearts. He reached out, and from the sleeve of his living cloak, a single, perfect, tightly furled leaf bud emerged, its scales a rich, rosy brown. It dropped into Cillian's trembling, outstretched hand. It felt warm, throbbing with a slow, potent life. Guard this. Guard the door. The thaw has begun, Carver, but the frost will bite back. With those final, echoing words, the figure began to dissolve. He did not walk away. The birch bark skin blurred into dappled light and shadow. The mossy hair became a patch of vibrant green on the forest floor. The towering presence dissipated into the evening mist rising from the damp earth. Soon, only the clearing remained, the carving now crowned with living green, and Cillian kneeling with a magical bud in his hand and a destiny he had never sought pressing down upon him. The green man had returned, and Cillian's simple, longing act had placed him squarely in the coming storm between the enduring wild and the relentless, ordering will of man. The thaw and the thagn. Killian returned to the monastery a ghost of his former self. The physical journey was a blur of shadowed paths and startled deer. The chill in his bones was no longer from the spring air, but from a contact with something so profoundly ancient it recalibrated his sense of time. The warm leaf bud, nestled in a small leather pouch against his chest, pulsed like a second, quieter heart. Its presence was a comfort and a terror. He slipped into the cloister before vespers, the carved head left in its sacred clearing, now a secret anchor to a world the monastery's walls denied. He expected his absence to be noted, a scandal brewing. Instead, he found a different kind of tension electrifying the cold stone corridors. Brother Leofric, the portly, perpetually anxious cellarer, hurried past him, his robes whispering urgent secrets to the flagstones. "Killian, there you are. The abbot has been asking. We have a guest, a most important guest. You are to present yourself in the chapter house after prayers, and for the love of all saints, look less like a man who's been wrestling wolves in the thicket." The guest was Lord Hereward. Killian felt the green man's bud give a distinct warm throb against his skin when the name was uttered. The chapter house, a stark room lined with wooden benches, felt different that evening. The usual scent of mildew and piety was overpowered by the smell of expensive wool, cold steel, and a faint, cloying perfume. Lord Hereward dominated the space without effort. He was a big man, not with the sturdy bulk of a farmer, but with the hardened mass of a professional warrior. His hair, the color of dirty flax, was cropped close to his skull in the Saxon style. His face was broad, planed with angles that spoke of a hard life, but his eyes were small, a pale, watery blue that missed nothing. They moved like a hunting hawk's, assessing, categorizing, dismissing. He wore a tunic of fine, dyed wool the color of dried blood, a heavy gold torque at his throat, and a sword with a pommel of polished amber at his hip. Behind him stood two housecarls, their faces impassive masks under iron helmets, their hands resting on the hafts of their long axes. Their presence in this house of God was a silent, violent proclamation of secular power. Abbot Wilfrid, a man usually possessed of a fragile dignity, seemed diminished, hunched in his carved chair like a wren next to a bull. "Ah, Brother Cillian, our skilled carver, Lord Hereward has come with a proposition for our house." Hereward's voice was a dry rasp, like stone grinding on stone. He did not look at the abbot, but fixed his pale eyes on Cillian. "My new lands," he began, the words leaving his mouth with slow precision. "They are unruly. The forests are thick, the marshes treacherous. They harbor outlaws. They breed superstition. They resist the plow and the pasture." He leaned forward slightly, and Cillian caught the scent of stale wine and old meat on his breath. "I am a practical man. I see a tree, I see timber for hall and palisade. I see a wolf, I see a threat to my flocks. I see a marsh, I see drained, fertile soil." Cillian's mouth went dry. He could feel the living warmth of the hill, the chorus voice of the guardian, the vibrant circle of sorrel. This man spoke of them as problems to be solved, resources to be extracted. "The abbot tells me you are from these parts," Hereward continued, "that your people knew the old ways, the old paths. He tells me you have a gift for giving shape to wood." His gaze sharpened. "I have need of a map. Not a chart on vellum, a true map, carved in oak, a map of the deep woods, the hidden vales, the springs, the sacred groves. He uttered the last two words with a twist of his lips, a mockery. The places where the simple folk still cling to their nonsense. I would know these places, to administer them properly, to bring light to the darkness. The request hung in the air, monstrous in its implication. He was not asking for a geographical survey. He was asking Cillian to betray the secret heart of the land, to translate the living, breathing mystery of the wild into a tactical diagram for its subjugation. The carved green man on the hill would be the first entry on such a map. Abbot Wilfred wrung his hands. The Lord Hereward has promised a generous donation to our building fund, brother. A new stained glass window for the choir. Think of the glory to God. But Cillian was thinking of the glory in the green man's eyes. He was thinking of Nessa's warning. Keys can open us well as lock. Hereward was not a man who would use a key to open a door. He would use it to identify a wall to tear down. "My lord," Cillian said, his own voice sounding thin and reedy in the thick silence, "my skill is humble. I carve saints and symbols for the love of God. The forests, they change. A path one season is a thicket the next. A stream alters its course. My knowledge is from childhood tales, not reliable for a lord's purposes." Hereward's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The pale eyes turned glacial. "Do not mistake me, monk. I did not come to barter with a churl. I provide for this house. I protect it. In return, I require service. Your service. Your knowledge, however faded, combined with your hands, will produce what I need." He stood, his movement abrupt, the steel of his scabbard scraping against the wooden bench. "You have until the next full moon. I will send men for the map. See that it is ready." He swept from the room, his housecarls a clanking, grim retinue. The abbot exhaled a long, shuddering breath, then looked at Cillian with a mixture of pity and irritation. "You heard the Thane, brother. This is a test of our loyalty, of our usefulness in this new world. Do not fail. The old beliefs are dead. It is a kindness to map their graves so we may build upon them." Cillian returned to his cell. The block of oak for St. Matthew still sat in the corner, a silent accusation. The memory of the green man's words echoed. The frost will bite back. Hereward was the frost, a calculated human winter seeking to perpetuate itself, to deny the necessary, chaotic, fecal thaw of spring. He could not comply. But refusal meant the monastery's disfavor, possibly his expulsion, or worse, Hereward's direct and brutal punishment. He was trapped between an old god who had just awakened and a new lord who represented an equally potent and far more immediately dangerous power. That night, he sought out Nessa in the herb garden, a walled square of order beside the chaotic wilderness of the forest beyond. She was on her knees, digging with a wooden trowel, her movements slow but sure under the light of a gibbous moon. "He knows," Cillian whispered, crouching beside her. Or, he suspects, he wants a map to the soul of the land. Nessa did not stop her work. "He feels the change," she murmured, her black eyes reflecting the moonlight. "A man like Hereward, whose power is built on control, feels a shift in the wind like a physical affront. The spring this year, have you noticed? The blackthorn bloomed a full week early. The badgers broke their winter sleep. The land is responding to its awakened heart. Hereward senses a rival authority. He seeks to locate it, to define it, so he might conquer it." "What do I do?" Killian's plea was becoming a constant refrain. Nessa sat back on her heels, wiping her earthy hands on her apron. "You must become a different kind of carver, not a maker of maps, but a maker of misdirections. You will give Hereward his map, but it will be a map of stories, not of geography. It will lead his men in circles, to places of seeming power that are merely echoes, away from the true heart. You must walk a blade's edge, boy. You must serve two masters to betray the one that matters." "And the green man? What will he do?" A slow smile touched Nessa's wrinkled lips. "He will do what he has always done. He will bring the spring. But this year, the thaw will not just melt ice. It will undermine foundations. It will swell rivers to break dams. It will give strength to the seeds hidden in the darkest earth." She looked at the pouch on Killian's chest. "Keep his gift close. It is a link. When the time comes, you may need to find him again, and quickly. The hill is not the only door. Where life persists against the odds, a whisper may reach him." Killian left her, his mind churning. He was a carver, a man of silence and solitary craft. Now he was to be a spy, a forger of truths in the enemy's camp. He returned to his cell and looked at the innocent block of oak. He would carve Hereward's map, but he would also, in secret, begin another carving. A small one, a personal one. A figure, not of a shouting, leafy face, but of a guardian standing tall, one hand raised in blessing, the other holding a budding staff. He would carve it from a piece of fallen rowan wood he had secretly collected from the hill. He would keep it hidden, a talisman, a reminder of the allegiance his soul had chosen in that mossy clearing. The battle lines were drawn not on open fields, but in the realm of symbols, knowledge, and the silent, relentless push of life against the will to control. The green man was awake, and his spring would be a rebellion. The map of lies. The following days settled into a strange, dual rhythm for Cillian. By day, in the full light of the monastery workshop, he became the obedient servant of Lord Hereward. A large, seasoned plank of ashwood, not oak, was procured. Ash for its straight grain, for weaponry and tools, a wood of utility, not spirit. This, he decided, was fitting. He began his deception with an outward show of diligence. He consulted the few aged parchments in the monastery's scant library, charts showing Roman roads long since reclaimed by moss, Deeds of land grant with vague boundaries like from the gray stone to the old willow. He walked the periphery of the known woods with brother Leofric, who chattered nervously about wolves and outlaws, while Cillian secretly noted the true, subtle markers. The elder tree that marked a hidden spring, the stand of foxgloves that indicated sour, thin soil, the particular crook in a river where the water ran deep and quiet, perfect for otter or escaping man. At night, by the light of a single shuttered candle, he worked on his rowan guardian. The wood was pale, hard, and smooth. His carving was no longer an unconscious outpouring like the green man's head. It was an act of focused devotion. Each stroke of the knife was a prayer, a plea for guidance, a shaping of his own resolve. The figure emerged serene and strong, its features an echo of the colossal being he had met, yet more human, more accessible. He hid it in a hollow behind a loose stone in his cell wall. The official map took shape on the ash plank. With a fine-pointed metal stylus, he burned lines into the pale wood. He drew the known rivers, the Roman road, the location of the monastery, Hereward's newly built timber hall on a cleared hilltop. Then he began to invent. He created a sacred grove deep in the woods, placing it around a real but insignificant cluster of hawthorns. He marked a druid circle where only a few scattered mossy boulders lay. He inscribed Path of the Old Ones along a route that was, in truth, a treacherous bog liable to swallow a man to his waist. He was careful. His lies were built upon kernels of local folklore, twisted just enough to sound plausible to an outsider, but ring false to anyone with true lived knowledge of the land. He was constructing a trap of belief, a maze for Hereward's mind and his men's boots. One afternoon, while etching the boggy area with particular care, a shadow fell across his workbench. He looked up to find a young man watching him. He was not a monk. He wore a simple tunic of undyed wool and leather breeches, his hair a tangled brown mane. His eyes were a startling, clear gray, and he held himself with the alert, quiet stillness of a forester. This was Eogan, Nessa's grandson, who brought herbs and sometimes game to the monastery from the deep woods. "Brother Cillian," Eogan said, his voice low. "Grandmother said you might be needing a guide for your map." His gaze flicked to the ash plank, taking in the burned lines. A faint, knowing frown touched his brow. Cillian's heart jumped. He glanced around the workshop. They were alone. "Does she know what I'm doing?" Eogan stepped closer, his eyes now fixed on the false druid's circle marking. "She knows you walk a knife's edge. She sent me to make sure your feet know the true shape of the blade." He pointed a calloused finger not at the invented circle, but at a blank space to the west of it. "Here, the Clace Nandawine, the hollow of the people. It's not on your map." Cillian had heard of it, a hidden, sheltered valley where a handful of families, remnants of the old ways, lived in secrecy, avoiding Saxon law and Christian tithe. "I cannot mark it. Hereward must not know." "Exactly," Eogan said, his gray eyes meeting Cillian's. "But you should know. And you should know what lies between Hereward's Hall and that hollow." He leaned in, his scent of pine resin and cold air filling Cillian's space. There is a place, not a sacred grove of stories, but a living one, a stand of ancient yews, so old their hearts are hollow. The air there, it tastes of time. It is one of the places where the veil is thin, where he might be felt, even when he walks elsewhere. Cillian understood. Eogan was giving him a true landmark, not for the map, but for his own secret understanding, a potential sanctuary, a place of power. Is it guarded? By silence, by thorns, by the fact that those who do not know how to listen will find only trees. Eogan's gaze was solemn. The people in the hollow, they still leave offerings at the foot of the eldest yew when the first snowdrop appears. They remember the turn. Hereward's men have started ranging closer. They shot a white hart last week, a bad sign. The theft of a sacred animal, a symbol of the other world. The frost was indeed biting back, with arrows and arrogance. "Can you take me there, to the yew grove?" Colian asked, the urge to connect with the true network of the land, to counterbalance his daily creation of falsehoods, overwhelming. Eogan studied him for a long moment, then gave a single, curt nod. "At next twilight. Meet me where the stream crosses the old track beyond the mill. Come alone, and bring your faith, brother. Not the one you wear in robes, but the one you carved in oak." When Eogan left, Cillian returned to his map. His hand trembled slightly as he added another detail near his invented bog. He burned in tiny, careful symbols, a series of small, interconnected spirals. To Hereward, they might look like a decorative border, a monk's whimsy. To anyone who knew the old symbols, it was a warning. Beware, illusion, shifting ground. He was no longer just a carver or a reluctant spy. He was becoming a cryptographer in a war of beliefs, encoding protections for the wild in a document intended for its destruction. The weight of the deception was immense, but the warmth of the Rowan talisman behind his cellstone and the memory of the green man's chorused voice steadied his hand. He would finish the map of lies, and then, at twilight, he would step back into the truth. The yew grove. Twilight was a stolen hour, a seam between the monastery's rigid daylight order and the secretive cloak of full night. Cillian slipped from the postulant's gate, a small door used by lay workers, his plain brown cloak over his robes. The air was cool and damp, carrying the distant rhythmic thud of the monastery's mill wheel, a sound of human industry that faded with each step toward the wild. He found Eogan where promised, a silhouette against the silver ribbon of the stream. The young forester said nothing, simply turned and moved into the tree line, with the fluid ease of a creature born to it. Cillian followed, his monastic shoes slipping on wet stones, his breathing soon loud in his own ears compared to Eogan's silent tread. They left the known paths behind. Eogan led him through a tapestry of shadows and emerging moonlight. They waded through ferns that brushed their thighs with cold, wet fingers. They clambered over fallen trunks, furry with moss, that glowed a faint, ethereal green in the dim light. The forest at night was a different entity. Sounds amplified. The crunch of a twig underfoot was a cannon shot. The hoot of an owl, a spectral query. The rustle in the undergrowth hinted at unseen, watching presences. Cillian felt a primal thrill of fear, but beneath it, a deepening sense of belonging. This was the world his carving had honored. After an hour of strenuous silent travel, the character of the woods changed. The deciduous trees, oak, ash, and birch, began to thin. The ground grew steeper, rockier. The air grew colder, sharper, and carried a faint, tangy, resinous scent. "We are close," Iogen whispered, his first words since their journey began. "The yew does not grow with the others. It claims its own ground." They entered a narrow, high-walled gully. At its end, the moonlight revealed a grove. It was not a bright, welcoming place. The yews stood like sentinels from the world's dawn. Their trunks were massive, fluted, and twisted. Some so vast their centers had collapsed into cavernous hollows large enough to shelter a man. Their branches, densely needled with dark green, created a canopy so thick it swallowed the moonlight, plunging the forest floor into a profound, velvety blackness, speckled only where a stray beam pierced through. The ground was a soft, silent carpet of fallen red berries and millennia of shed needles. The silence here was absolute. Not even the wind seemed to penetrate this sanctuary. It was a silence that felt earned, ancient, and heavy with sentience. Iogen stopped at the edge of the clearing, his manner becoming reverent. "This is it. The heart tree is there." He pointed to the largest yew, its trunk a cathedral arch of living wood. "We do not enter unless called. We wait. We listen." Cillian stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel it, the thinness Nessa and Iogen had spoken of. The boundary between this world and something else felt permeable here. The air thrummed with a low, sub-audible frequency that vibrated in his teeth. He reached into his tunic and pulled out the leather pouch. Untying it, he let the green man's leaf bud rest in his palm. In the deep gloom of the yew grove, the bud began to glow. Not with the fierce green light of the hilltop carving's eye, but with a soft, internal amber warmth, like a tiny piece of captured sunset. It pulsed gently, in time with Cillian's own quickened heartbeat. From the cavernous hollow of the great heart yew, a shape stirred. It was not the full, magnificent form from Knocknandir. This manifestation was subtler, more a concentration of the grove's essence. A figure coalesced from shadow and shifting needles. He was smaller, his form leaner, woven more from the specific spirit of this place, ancient, patient, and touched with the melancholy of eternal witness. His antlers were not of a stag, but were instead intricate, branching formations of dark yew wood, studded with the tree's poisonous red berries. His eyes were pools of the same soft amber light that emanated from the bud in Cillian's hand. "Carver," the voice came, not a chorus here, but a dry, whispering rustle, like needles brushing against stone. "You walk the knife edge. I feel the lies you burn into wood. They are a shield, a necessary shadow." Cillian sank to his knees, not in fear, but in profound relief. The connection was real. The one who would own the land, hereward, he demands a map. I am making him a labyrinth of falsehoods. The yew-green man inclined his head, the berry antlers gleaming. Deception is a tool of the hunted. The forest knows this. The fox knows this. You learn. The amber eyes shifted to Eogan, who stood with his head bowed. And you, son of the hollow, who remembers the offerings, the white heart's blood cries from the soil. The balance is pricked. What must we do? Eogan asked, his voice steady but filled with a fierce loyalty for his hidden people. The thaw must become a flood, the spirit whispered. The spring I bring is not a gentle suggestion, it is a command. But the command is hindered. His stone hall, his cleared fields, they are like a wound. The land's energy cannot flow. It pools, it sickens. The figure gestured with a hand that seemed made of gnarled, polished root. The map will guide his men to dead ends, but his will is a blight that spreads from his seat of power. That seat must be unsettled. Cillian felt a cold dread. You mean attack him? His hall is fortified. His men are warriors. The amber eyes flickered. Not with sword or flame. You are a carver. Your power is in symbol, in shaping perception. His power rests on fear and order. Undermine that. The green man's form began to subtly shift, elements of the grove blending into him. Let the wild remind him of its presence. Let the spring he fears enter his very hall. Let the foundation stones of his authority know the push of the root and the sap. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in Cillian's mind. It was not violence, but a kind of spiritual sabotage. The offerings at the foot of this tree, what is given? Eogan answered, milk, honey, the first fruits, symbols of life's sweetness, given in thanks for its return. And if such symbols were to appear, Cillian said slowly, not in thanks, but as a claim, in the heart of his ordered world? If the wild, in its most benign yet undeniable form, were to announce its tenure upon his doorstep. The yew-green man made a sound that was like the creaking of a great tree in a slow wind, a laugh or a sigh of approval. The carver begins to think like the growing thing, not to smash the wall, but to make the wall itself bloom with inconvenient truth. He extended his root-like hand. Give me the bud. Cillian placed the warm, glowing bud into the spirit's palm. The green man closed his fingers around it. When he opened them, the bud had transformed. It was now a cluster of 3 different seeds: a shiny, dark hawthorn berry, a pale, plump oat grain, and a tiny, golden acorn. They pulsed with a combined, gentle light. Take these. Plant them where his authority is most stark, where his eye is most blind to life. Let them be your true map, carver, a map not of places, but of possibilities. Their growth will be my voice in his silent, stone-hearted places. Killian took the seeds, their light fading to a mere warmth as they touched his skin. The green man's form was dissolving, bleeding back into the darkness of the hollow trunk and the deep green of the needles. Remember, the whispering voice faded. The greatest forest was once a single seed that refused to remain buried. The grove returned to its immense, watching silence. Killian and Ogun exchanged a look. The path forward was no longer just about defensive lies. It was about a quiet, green insurrection. They turned and left the sacred grove, the seeds of a subtle war resting in Killian's hand. A war to be fought not with steel, but with stubborn, irrevocable life. Seeds of insurrection. The return journey from the yew grove was a silent, inward-focused trek. The physical world, the gnarred roots underfoot, the sigh of the night wind in the high branches, felt like a veil over a deeper, humming reality. The 3 seeds in Killian's pouch were a tangible weight, a condensed potential that felt both miraculous and dangerously volatile. They were not mere botanical specimens. They were sigils of the green man's will, dormant syllables of a green language waiting to be spoken. Ogun parted ways with him at the stream, his gray eyes solemn in the pre-dawn gloom. "I will speak to the people of the hollow," he murmured. "They will be ready. When the signs appear, they will know the time to remember openly has come." He melted into the forest, leaving Cillian alone with the growing burden of his role. Dawn was a pale smear on the eastern horizon when Cillian slipped back into the monastery. The world of men felt abruptly loud, angular, and sour-smelling. The sanctimonious silence of the dormitory, the distant clatter from the kitchens, the gritty taste of the coarse bread at breakfast, all grated against his senses, now attuned to the damp, sweet symphony of the wild. He moved through his morning obligations like a sleepwalker, his mind fixated on the seeds and the green man's charge. Plant them where his authority is most stark. Lord Hereward's authority was a multifaceted construct. It was his timber hall on the cleared hill. It was the new stone church being built beside it, a deliberate symbol of the new God sanctioning the new Lord's rule. It was the ordered fields stripped of hedgerows for efficiency. It was the gallows erected at the crossroads. Killian knew he could not simply walk into Hereward's hall and scatter seeds in the rushes. The planting had to be symbolic, potent, and undetectable until it was too late. It had to be a carving in living matter. His opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, a messenger from Hereward arrived, not to collect the map, the full moon was still days away, but to summon Killian to the Theg's Hall. The abbot, flustered and obsequious, delivered the news. "Lord Hereward wishes to the aesthetics of the map. He desires it to be a fitting ornament for his hall as well as a functional tool. You are to go at once. Take your tools. Show respect, brother. Killian's blood ran cold. To stand in the heart of the enemy's power, with the seeds of its disruption hidden on his person, was a terrifying prospect. Yet it was also the perfect opportunity for reconnaissance. He gathered his carving tools into a leather roll, ensuring his sharpest, finest gouges were included. He secreted the 3 seeds in a small waxed pouch and tucked it into the tight sleeve of his robe, where he could feel its slight bulge against his wrist. The walk to Hereward's estate was a journey through a wounded landscape. The path cut through fields where tree stumps, like rotten teeth, still studded the raw earth. The streams here were muddy, trampled by cattle. The air smelled of wood smoke and manure, lacking the complex perfume of the untouched forest. Hereward's Hall stood atop its hill, a statement of dominance. It was a long, high-roofed structure of fresh, yellow timber, its gable ends carved with interlacing beasts in the Saxon style, dragons and wolves locked in eternal, stylized combat. Beside it, rising from a skeleton of wooden scaffolding, was the small stone church, its half-built walls echoing with the chisel strikes of masons. Collian was ushered into the hall. The interior was a cavern of shadows and smoky light. A central fire pit sent a thick column of smoke towards a hole in the roof. The walls were hung with woolen tapestries depicting battles and hunting scenes. The air was thick with the smells of roasted meat, ale, sweat, and damp dog. At the far end, on a raised wooden dais, Lord Hereward sat in a high-backed chair, speaking with his reeve, a thin man with a wax tablet. Hereward looked up as Collian approached. The pale eyes assessed him, lingering on the roll of tools. "Monk, you have the map?" "It progresses, my lord. The abbot said you wished to discuss its form." "I do," Hereward said, leaning back. He took a sip from a horn cup. "A bare board with burned lines is fit for a stable. This map will hang behind my seat. It will speak of my knowledge and thus my mastery of this land. I want it adorned, carved, the forests raised in relief, the rivers grooved deep, the places of note." He paused, a slight, cold smile touching his lips. "The sacred groves, the druid circles you are marking, they should be prominent. Let any who see it understand that I comprehend the old mysteries and thus hold them in my hand." The arrogance of it stole Cillian's breath. Hereward wanted to wear his desecration as a badge of honor. "It will be as you command, my lord," Cillian managed to say, his voice flat. "Good. You will work here today, in that corner. I would see your method." It was not a request. It was a test, a demonstration of ownership over Cillian's skill. A trestle table and a stool were set up near the side wall, away from the main fire but still in plain view. Collian unrolled his tools, the polished steel gleaming dully. He set the ash plank map on the table. He had brought it with him, his lies immortalized in burned lines. As he began to carve the first raised ridge of a false forest, his mind raced. He was inside the fortress. The seeds were with him, but where to plant them? The hall itself was temporary, its timber already dead. The true seat of Hereward's lasting authority was the stone church beside it, a structure meant to outlast wood and flesh, to sanctify his lineage's claim for generations. He worked through the morning, the rhythmic tap-tap of his mallet a tiny counterpoint to the hall's bustle. He saw Hereward's world up close, the housecarls dicing by the door, the serving women moving with downcast eyes, the scope tuning his harp in the corner, preparing to sing of his lord's genealogical fiction. It was a world built on visible hierarchy and controlled narrative. At noon, a commotion arose. A group of hunters returned, dragging the carcass of a massive boar. The hall erupted in rough congratulations. Hereward descended from his dais to inspect the prize, his attention fully captured. In the fluid shift of focus, Killian saw his chance. He muttered about needing fresh air to clear the wood dust from his lungs. A guard at the main door gave him a cursory nod, his attention also on the boar. Killian stepped outside, the cold air a shock. He walked not toward the privy, but casually, with the measured pace of a man admiring stonework, toward the half-built church. The site was quiet. The masons were at their midday meal. The skeleton of the building rose around him, the newly cut limestone blocks pale and sharp-edged against the gray sky. He approached the eastern end, where the altar would someday stand. This was the spiritual heart, the point from which authority would radiate. The foundation course here was already laid, great squared stones sitting directly on the stripped earth. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was sacrilege upon sacrilege, a violation of both the new God and the old. But the green man's whisper was louder. Let the foundation stones know the push of the root. He knelt, pretending to examine the joinery. With a quick, surreptitious movement, he slipped the waxed pouch from his sleeve. His fingers, trembling, pried out the 3 seeds. The hawthorn berry, symbol of fierce protection and the threshold. The oat grain, symbol of sustenance and the cultivated land that must remember its wild origins. The acorn, symbol of potential, of the mighty oak that could, in time, split stone. At the meeting point of 3 foundation stones, where a dark, damp crack promised contact with the soil beneath, he pressed the seeds. He pushed them deep into the gritty mortar with his thumb, covering them with dust. They were invisible. Insignificant. They were a time-born curse, a patient blessing. As he stood, a voice cracked across the yard. "You, monk, what's your business there?" It was one of the masons, a burly man with a thick beard, holding a loaf of bread. Cillian's mind went blank for a second. Then he gestured back toward the hall. "Lord Hereward, he inquires about the progress. The stone is fine. It will make a sturdy house for God." The words tasted like ash. The mason grunted, suspicious, but unwilling to challenge a man summoned by the Thane. "Keep away from the work. It's not blessed yet. Ground's still wild." It is about to become wilder, Cillian thought, a fierce, secret joy cutting through his fear. He nodded and walked back to the hall, his mission accomplished. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He carved with mechanical precision, raising false hills and groves from the ash plank. Hereward glanced his way occasionally, his pale eyes satisfied with the display of controlled creativity. Cillian was a useful tool, obeying his command, beautifying his dominion. When dusk fell, Cillian was dismissed with orders to return with the finished map by the full moon. He packed his tools, the map now adorned with beginnings of carved deception. As he walked away from the hall, down the wounded hill, he did not look back. But he felt it, a subtle, subterranean shift. A connection had been made. The seeds were nestled in the very root of Hereward's proud, stone-proof authority. They were sleeping, but spring was coming, and stone, for all its seeming permanence, was no match for the patient, silent ambition of a seed in sacred soil. The moon of unveiling. The days leading to the full moon were taut with a silent, burgeoning energy. Cillian worked feverishly in the monastery workshop, not only on Hereward's map, but on his own secret Rowan talisman, which now felt more crucial than ever. The ash plank transformed under his hands. False forests rose in rounded relief, their leaves suggested by meticulous stippling. Rivers became deep grooves that caught the shadows, and his invented sites of power, the Druid Circle, the path of the Old Ones, were given particular prominence, carved with spurious, intricate knotwork that mimicked ancient designs, but led the eye in meaningless circles. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, beautiful and utterly false. The true work, however, was happening far from his chisel. In the hidden hollow, Eogan and his people prepared. They did not sharpen swords or fletch arrows. Instead, they gathered the first shy offerings of the accelerated spring. Baskets of tender nettle tops, early primrose flowers, branches of pussy willow heavy with soft catkins. They rehearsed half-remembered songs for the sowing, their melodies older than the Latin chants echoing from the monastery. And in the deep woods, the green man walked. His presence was a rising tide. Where he passed, bluebells erupted in cobalt pools weeks ahead of season. Ferns uncurled their fiddleheads with an audible soft snap. Fox cubs tumbled boldly in sun-dappled clearings, and badgers dug new sets with frantic energy. The land itself seemed to breathe deeper, its exhalation a warm, green-scented wind that sighed through valleys still thought to be locked in winter's grip. The natural world was mobilizing, its allegiance pledged to the awakened guardian. Cillian felt the change in the monastery's very stones. The brothers whispered of unseasonal warmth, of strange dreams filled with rustling leaves. Brother Leafric complained that mice were boldly invading the granary, driven by a preternatural hunger. Nessa, in her herb garden, simply smiled her wrinkled smile and planted seeds with a gentle, knowing pressure, as if introducing them to the soil. The full moon arrived, a great luminous pearl floating in a clear, cold sky. Its light bleached the color from the world, turning it into a tableau of silver and indigo. This was the night of the map's delivery, and of something far greater. Cillian shouldered the finished ashclank, now a heavy, carved shield of lies. He set out for Hereward's hall, his footsteps loud in the crystalline silence. The moon cast long, stark shadows, making the familiar path alien and expectant. As he approached the cleared hill, he saw the hall was alive with light and noise. Torches flared at its entrance, and the sound of raucous singing and the thump of ale cups spilled into the night. Hereward was celebrating something, a successful hunt, a new tribute, his own unchecked power. A housecarl, his breath plumbing in the cold air, took the map from Cillian with a grunt and jerked his head toward the hall entrance. He wants to see you hang it himself. The interior was a furnace of noise and heat after the silent night. The fire roared. Hereward, flushed with drink and pride, held court. His men, warriors and lesser thanes, filled the benches. When Cillian entered with the map, a rough cheer went up. "The scribe of my dominion," Hereward boomed, raising his cup. "Come, show us the face of the land I have tamed." Cillian's hands were steady as he and two housecarls mounted the heavy plank on the wall behind Hereward's high seat. When it was fixed, the torchlight played over the carved relief, making the false forests seem to dance with deceptive depth. The men murmured appreciatively. To them, it was a symbol of conquest, a picture of a puzzle solved. Hereward rose and stood before it, tracing the carved lines with a thick finger. "See here," he announced to his hall, "the dens of the old spirits, marked, known, and now mine. There is no shadow in this land that does not fall at my bidding." He turned to Cillian, his pale eyes glinting. "You have done well, monk. You will be rewarded." At that precise moment, a strange hush fell upon the hall. Not a silence, but a sudden dimming of the noise, as if a thick blanket had been thrown over the revelry. The sound that replaced it came from outside. A low, vibrant hum, like a million insects singing in harmony, yet woven through with the sound of rustling leaves and trickling water. It was the Green Man's chorus, amplified, carried on the night air, seeping through the timber walls. The men fell silent, cups halfway to lips. Hereward's triumphant expression froze, then cracked into confusion and dawning anger. "What is that noise?" Before anyone could answer, a series of gasps came from the side of the hall nearest the half-built church. Men were pointing at the walls. Where the timbers met the packed earth floor, tiny, impossible shoots were emerging. Not from the wood, but from the very soil of the hall floor itself. Pale, questing threads of green, glowing with a faint internal bioluminescence, pushed through the compacted dirt. They were ivy tendrils, moving with visible, deliberate speed, climbing the timber posts. Buds along their length swelled and opened into perfect star-like white flowers that filled the air with a honeyed, narcotic scent. Panic began to bubble. "Sorcery!" a man cried. Hereward's face purpled. "The church! Check the church!" He stormed toward the door, his warriors staggering after him, drawing swords and axes. Killian, forgotten in the sudden chaos, followed at the back, his heart a wild thing in his chest. The scene outside was one of breathtaking, silent revolution. The half-built stone church, under the full moon's glare, was no longer a skeleton of limestone. It was a tapestry of rampant, miraculous growth. From the very crack where Killian had planted the seeds, and from every other joint and crevice, life had erupted. Hawthorn, tough and thorny, spiraled around the foundation stones, its buds bursting into creamy white blossom. Oat stalks, tall and heavy with grain, swayed from between the blocks of the rising walls, their seed heads glowing like pale lanterns. And from the eastern foundation, at the altar point, a young oak sapling, already as thick as a man's arm and twice his height, thrust upward, its leaves a vibrant, impossible green, splitting the carefully laid stone course above it with an audible, groaning creak. The mason's tools, left scattered, were being embraced by creeping vines. The wooden scaffolding groaned under the weight of flowering nightshade and quick-growing hopbines. The air hummed with the same verdant chorus, and the scent was overpowering. Blossom, rich earth, and crushing vitality. Hereward stood transfixed, his rage momentarily swallowed by sheer, incomprehensible awe. This was not fire or sword. This was the land itself, rejecting his order, reclaiming its own with serene, unstoppable force. His authority, symbolized by this stone church, was being gently, thoroughly, and publicly dismantled by a handful of seeds and an unstoppable spring. Then, from the tree line at the base of the hill, lights appeared. Dozens of small, warm points of flame, torches and lanterns carried by the people of the hollow. They did not advance as an army, but processed slowly, singing one of the old sowing songs Eogan had taught them, their voices thin but clear on the night air, weaving with the green man's chorus. They came to the edge of the cleared land, a silent, watching community of the old ways, bearing their baskets of green offerings. It was a tableau of perfect, devastating symbolism. The new Lord's stone edifice was being consumed by the wild. The people he had displaced and ignored stood witness, singing the songs of the land he had tried to silence. His own hall was sprouting flowers from its floor. Hereward found his voice, a roar of sheer, impotent fury. "Cut it down! Burn it! Now!" His men, superstitious terror warring with discipline, hesitated. To attack this growth felt like attacking the world itself. They stood frozen. A final figure emerged from the shadow of the great oak sapling, now embedded in the church wall. It was the Green Man, but in his full, Knock-Nandar majesty. He stood taller than the church walls, woven from moonlight and the very essence of the rampant plants around him. His eyes were twin green suns. He looked at Hereward, and when he spoke, his voice was the cracking of stone and the sigh of roots through soil. "You sought to map the wild Thegn, to own the turn of the year. But the map is not the territory. The spring is not a subject. It is a sovereign. You are a guest in this land. Remember your place. He raised a hand, and a wave of fragrance, of damped soil, of opening buds, of life's relentless push washed over the hill. It carried no violence, only an immense, calm assertion of truth. Then, suddenly as it had come, the visible manifestation faded. The glowing plants dimmed to normal hues, though they remained, vitally, impossibly there. The chorus softened to a whisper, and then was gone, leaving only the stunned silence of men and the distant, receding song of the hollow's people. Hereward was left standing before his ruined church, his hall defiled with blossoms, his map on the wall now a cruel joke, his men staring at him with fear and a dawning, unsettling doubt. The display of raw, ecological power had broken something more vital than stone. The unshakable belief in his own human-centric control. Cillian slipped away into the night, unseen. The moon looked down, its silver light now feeling like a benediction. The green man had spoken, the thaw had become a flood, and the war for the soul of the land had shifted irrevocably. The next move belonged to a wounded, furious, and dangerously cornered man. The wounded bear. The aftermath of the moon of unveiling was a silence more profound than any noise. In the days that followed, an eerie, strained quiet descended upon Hereward's hill. The boisterous confidence that once radiated from the hall was snuffed out, replaced by a watchful, simmering tension. The physical evidence of the green man's power could not be erased. The church stood as a monument to defeat, its stones imprisoned by thriving, deeply rooted plants. The hawthorn was no tender shoot. Overnight, its trunk had thickened to the width of a man's thigh, its thorns grown long and sharp as daggers, its roots undoubtedly delving deep between the foundation stones, cracking them with inexorable patience. The oat stalks, now golden and ripe, whispered against the limestone in the slightest breeze. The oak sapling, a young giant, had already doubled in size, its canopy casting a dappled shadow over the intended altar space. Hereward ordered the growth cleared. The strongest of his housecarls, men who could split a shield with an axe blow, attacked the hawthorn with iron tools. The thorns tore their skin, and the wood, though new, was preternaturally hard, blunting their blades and turning their strikes with a resilient, rubbery strength. When one man finally hacked through a major branch, a gush of sap, the color and scent of fresh blood, oozed from the wound, and a collective groan, like a wounded animal, seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The men stepped back, crossing themselves, their faces pale. The plants were not merely growing, they were defending. Inside the hall, the delicate ivy and star-like flowers that had sprung from the floor were easier to pull, but they returned each night, faster and thicker, until the rushes were permanently veined with living green. The air inside carried the perpetual, cloying sweetness of blossom, a scent that began to sicken the men, reminding them constantly of their humiliation. Hereward became a caged bear, pacing the confines of his own domain. His pale eyes, once cold with calculation, now burned with a raw, paranoid fury. He saw conspiracy in every shadow. The failure of the plants to yield to steel confirmed his deepest suspicion. This was not natural. It was targeted sorcery, and it had a human agent. His gaze fell irrevocably upon the map. The beautiful, carved ash plank hanging behind his high seat now mocked him. Its prominent, false sacred sites were a lure, a joke played upon his arrogance. The monk had not just deceived him, he had made him a laughingstock before his own men, and, he was sure, before the hidden people of the woods. The carver was the key. The carver had been in the churchyard. The carver had delivered the map on the very night of the manifestation. Killian, back at the monastery, felt the noose tightening. The abbot had heard wild, contradictory accounts of the night. Stories of pagan magic, of a forest giant, of a singing horde. He looked at Killian with new, fearful eyes, but said nothing, caught between his fear of Hereward and a superstitious dread of forces his faith did not encompass. Killian worked in the workshop, but his productivity was a sham. He was waiting, listening to the forest's amplified song through the stone walls, feeling the green man's presence like a distant, comforting drumbeat. He did not have to wait long. 3 days after the full moon, a detachment of Hereward's housecarls, led by the Then's ruthless Reeve, a man named Wulfric, arrived at the monastery. Their manner was not one of request, but of seizure. They bypassed the abbot and went directly to the workshop. Wulfric was a stark contrast to Hereward's brute force. He was lean, with a face like a hatchet and eyes the color of flint. He spoke in a clipped, precise tone that brooked no discussion. "Brother Killian, Lord Hereward requires your further service. You will come with us. Now, bring your carving tools." "For what purpose?" Killian asked, his voice dry. "A project. To rectify an imbalance." Wulfric's thin smile held no warmth. "The Lord believes your unique skills, your knowledge of both wood and the old ways, are necessary to restore order." Killian knew refusal was impossible. To protest would be to confirm his guilt. He packed his tools, his fingers lingering on the hidden Rowan talisman in its niche. He could not take it. He left it as a silent pledge to return. The journey to Hereward's Hall was a somber procession. The land itself seemed to watch. They passed a field where the first poppies blazed scarlet among the barley, a splash of defiant wildness in a controlled crop. A hare sat boldly in the path, regarding the armed men with unblinking eyes before loping away, not in fear, but with a leisurely disdain. The hall, when they arrived, was a fortress under a psychic siege. The men on guard had hollow-eyed looks. The vibrant, impossible growth at the church site was a constant, taunting presence in their peripheral vision. Cillian was not taken to the hall, but around it, to a cleared space behind the kitchens. Here a grim scene awaited him. A massive, ancient oak trunk, felled from the deepest part of the woods, lay on the ground. It was a grandfather tree, its girth wider than 2 men were tall, its rings counting centuries. Its death was an atrocity, a direct counterstrike against the heart of the wild. Beside it stood Hereward. The Then looked older, his face etched with new lines of rage and sleeplessness. He held an axe, its blade still sticky with dark sap. He had personally participated in the murder of the tree. "Monk," Hereward said, his voice a low rasp. "You see this? This is power. Real power. The power to take. The power to end." He kicked the massive trunk. "Your friend in the woods uses tricks, growing flowers, singing songs. This," he slapped the wood, "is a statement he will understand." Cillian felt a physical pain in his chest, a sympathetic wound for the slain giant. The tree's spirit felt like a fading ember in the air. "You will carve this," Hereward commanded, his pale eyes locking on to Cillian's. "You will carve a new map, not of lies, a true map. You will carve the likeness of this land, and upon it you will carve my hall, my fields, my roads. And you will carve him, the leaf-faced demon who troubles me, underfoot, crushed beneath the roots of this my tree. You will carve my victory in the flesh of his kingdom. You will do it here, where I can watch, and when it is done, we will burn it before the ruins of my church, and its smoke will carry my dominion back to the heart of the forest." The cruelty of the scheme was breathtaking. It was a psychological and spiritual counterattack. He was forcing Cillian to use his sacred skill, his connection to the green world, to enact a ritual of desecration. He was to sculpt a prophecy of the green man's defeat from the body of one of his own eldest children. It was a perversion of creation, meant to break Cillian's will and strike at the guardian through the carver's own hands. Wulfric placed a mallet and a set of chisels, crude, heavy tools meant for rough shaping, not art, on the trunk. "Begin." A circle of housecarls gathered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and grim approval. They were men of action. This symbolic warfare made them uncomfortable, but they understood the intent to humble an enemy. Cillian stood before the vast dead oak. Its bark was rough under his palms. He could still feel a lingering deep warmth within it, the final echo of a long, slow life. To carve Hereward's hateful vision into it would be the ultimate betrayal. He picked up a heavy gouge. It felt like a weapon. He looked from the tree to Hereward's triumphant, expectant face, to the watching, hard eyes of the warriors. He was trapped. His mind raced, skittering like a hunted animal. He could not do this. But to refuse was death, and his death would not save the green man. It would merely remove a piece from the board. Then a thought emerged, cold and clear. It was not his own. It felt like a seed planted in his mind by the whisper in the yew grove. The carver begins to think like the growing thing. He could not refuse the act, but he could subvert the intention. Hereward wanted a map of conquest. What if Cillian carved something else? What if, hidden within the demanded imagery, he encoded a different story? A story not of crushing, but of subsuming, not of defeat, but of transformation. He lifted the mallet. He set the gouge against the pale, exposed wood where the bark had been stripped. He took a breath, not of prayer to any god, but of apology to the tree. Let your body tell one last story, he thought, a story for those who can see. He struck the first blow. The sound was a deep, mournful thunk that echoed in the silent yard. He began to carve, not the clean lines of Hereward's hall, but the rough, rolling outline of the land itself. He worked slowly, his movements deliberate, his face a mask of concentration. Hereward watched, a satisfied glint in his eye, believing his will was being imposed. But Cillian's mind was elsewhere. As he shaped the hills and valleys, he thought of the hidden hollow. As he gouged the river courses, he remembered the secret springs. He did not carve Hereward's hall as a proud structure. He suggested it with a few shallow lines, making it look small, precarious upon its hill. And when it came time to carve the figure of the green man underfoot, he did not carve a crushed, pathetic form. He carved the green man emerging. From the very grain of the wood, from the roots of the stylized trees, Cillian used the deep, natural curves and whirls of the oak to suggest a form rising. The face was not downtrodden. It was turned upward, the mouth open in what could be interpreted as a cry of despair by Hereward, but which Cillian shaped as the beginning of the leafy, roaring shout of his original carving. The figure was not beneath the land. It was unfolding from it, its limbs becoming rivers, its hair becoming the canopy of a forest that was not depicted as crushed, but as spreading, enveloping the tiny hall in a gentle, inescapable embrace. He worked for hours until his hands were raw and blistered, until the light began to fail. He created a scene that, to the untutored eye, showed a landscape with a hall and a subdued spirit. But to anyone who knew the true symbology, to Eogan, to Nessa, to the green man himself, it showed the indomitable wild absorbing the transient works of man, the guardian not defeated, but rising eternally from the very soil of his own sacrifice. When he finally lowered his tools, exhausted, Hereward approached. The Then examined the rough-hewn scene. He saw the hall. He saw the vague, prone figure. He nodded, a grim finality in his expression. "It will do. Tomorrow night we burn it. The message will be sent.
Cillian was taken to a storage shed and locked inside, a guard posted at the door. He sat in the dark on a sack of grain, the scent of the dead oak clinging to his clothes. He ached in body and soul. He had performed the demanded sacrilege, but, he hoped, woven a secret defiance into its heart. The wounded bear had lashed out, forcing the carver to his knees. But in the grain of the wood, a different truth was now hidden, waiting for the fire that would, he prayed, release its meaning not as ash, but as a signal, a cry for help woven into the smoke that would rise into the spring sky. The smoke that speaks. The shed was a tomb of shadows and granary dust. Cillian sat with his back against the rough planks, the lingering scent of the slain oak a ghost on his skin. His hands throbbed, each pulse a reminder of the day's forced labor, of the betrayal etched into ancient wood. Yet, beneath the fatigue and despair, a fragile thread of hope persisted. His carving was a cryptogram.
Would anyone read it? Could a message sent in smoke and symbolism reach its intended recipient? Outside, he heard the preparations. The thud of the massive oak trunk being rolled onto a pyre of dry brush and split timber. The muttered conversations of men tasked with a ritual they did not fully understand, their superstition lending a nervous edge to their efficiency. The smell of torch pitch and fear mingled with the ever-present perfume of the blossoming invaders. As twilight deepened into night, the shed door creaked open. Wulfric stood silhouetted against the torchlit yard. "Come, the Lord wants you to witness." Cillian was led out. A large pyre had been constructed in the open space between the hall and the entangled church. The carved oak trunk lay atop it like a sacrificial victim. Hereward stood before it, a burning brand in his hand. His face, lit from below, was a mask of grim theater. His men formed a loose, watchful circle. Beyond them, the darkened woods were a wall of silent observation. "The land is cleansed with fire," Hereward announced, his voice carrying in the hushed air. "The old lies are burned away. The wild is shown its place. His salam, fuel for the hearth of order." He looked directly at Cillian, the flamelight dancing in his pale eyes. "Your art serves a new purpose now, monk. To etch the truth of mastery, and then to bear that truth to the heavens as ash." He thrust the brand into the base of the pyre. The dry kindling caught with a hungry whoosh. Flames, orange and eager, leapt upward, licking at the edges of the massive trunk. The firelight painted the scene in chaotic, dancing relief, making the carved lines on the oak seem to writhe. Cillian watched, his breath caught in his throat. The heat washed over him, a violent contrast to the cool spring night. The wood began to crackle and pop, the voice of the dying tree crying out one final time. Smoke, thick and white at first, billowed into the sky. Hereward watched with savage satisfaction as the flames began to consume the map of supposed conquest.
But as the fire grew hotter, digging into the heartwood, something changed. The smoke began to shift. It was no longer a uniform rising column. It started to twist, to coalesce. The wind, which had been still, began to stir. Not a natural breeze, but a gentle, focused exhalation from the surrounding forest, a breath directed at the pyre. Guided by this unseen breath, the smoke began to form shapes. It was subtle at first, wisps that suggested rolling hills and winding streams, mirroring the landscape Cillian had carved. The men murmured, shifting uneasily. Then, as the fire reached the central portion where the green man figure was carved, the smoke thickened and darkened. It did not show a crushed spirit. Instead, it formed a towering, nebulous figure with arms of swirling gray that became the hills, with a head that blossomed into a great spreading canopy of smoke leaves that blotted out the stars. The face in the smoke was unmistakable, the roaring mouth, the leafy mane. It was the face from Cillian's original carving, from the monastery cell, from Knuk Nanundair. It was not underfoot. It was immense, dominant, looking down upon the pyre, upon the hall, upon Hereward himself, with an expression of serene, ancient sovereignty. A collective gasp ran through the housecarls. Some stumbled back, making the sign of the cross. Others gripped their weapons, but there was nothing to fight. Hereward's triumphant expression shattered into incredulous fury. "No! Fan it! Disperse it!" But men waving cloaks at the smoke only made the image swirl more dramatically, the leafy canopy reforming with stubborn clarity. The green man's message, encoded in the grain and released by the fire, was being broadcast in a language of air and light that every man, learned or simple, could understand. I am not below. I am the world in which you burn your small fires. Then, from the heart of the pyre, where the acorn, oat, and hawthorn seeds had conceptually been born, 3 distinct tendrils of smoke erupted. One was a dark, thorny spiral. One was a golden, grainy plume. One was a strong, straight column that branched at the top like a tiny tree. They rose, intertwined, and arrowed not straight up, but in a specific direction, east, toward the Hill of Oaks, Knuk Nanundair. The signal was sent. The cryptic map had spoken its true meaning in the universal tongue of smoke and symbol. It was a beacon, and it was a summons. In the woods, the response was immediate. The green man's chorus, which had been a soft background hum since the unveiling, swelled in volume and intensity. It was no longer a distant song. It was an approaching vibration, a harmonic convergence of leaf rustle, stone grind, and water song that rolled toward the hill like a living fog of sound. From the tree line, the lights of the hollow's people appeared once more, but this time they did not sing. They stood in silent vigil, their lanterns held high, bearing witness to the smoke signal and the answering call of the land. Hereward, unhinged by this second, public mystical rebuke, drew his sword. His rationality, the bedrock of his power, was crumbling. "Sorcerer!" he screamed, turning not toward the woods, but toward Killian. "This is your doing, your poison in the wood." He took a step toward the carver, his sword point rising. At that moment, the very ground seemed to revolt. From the soil around the pyre, from the edges of the trampled yard, a surge of new growth erupted. Not the beautiful blossoming vines of before, but aggressive, fast-moving roots and runners. Thick, fibrous nettle stems shot up, stinging the legs of the housecarls. Tough, creeping brambles snaked across the ground, tangling feet. Moss spread with visible speed over the stacked firewood nearby, smothering the flames at the pyre's edge in a hiss of steam. The land itself was rising to defend the one who had spoken for it. In the confusion, us men cursed and stumbled, trying to free themselves from the clutching plants. A figure darted from the shadow of the hall. It was Iogen. He moved with the silent, fluid speed of a forest creature, grabbing Cillian's arm. "Now," he hissed. They ran, not toward the woods where the lights were, but around the back of the hall, into the kitchen garden, and down a steep, overgrown path that led to a sunken stream. Shouts erupted behind them, but they were muffled, confused by the chaotic scene of the smoking, speaking pyre and the suddenly aggressive vegetation. They splashed through the icy stream, the water erasing their scent and their trail. Iogen led him up the far bank and into a thicket of willow that clutched at their clothes like benevolent hands. Only when they were deep within the woven shadows, the sounds of the hall distant and distorted, did they stop, chests heaving. Cillian looked back. Against the night sky, the column of smoke still rose, the giant, leafy face slowly dissipating, but its impression lingering in the mind's eye. Beneath it, Hereward's Hill was a hive of frantic, futile activity. The ritual meant to cement his power had instead broken it, broadcasting his impotence and summoning the very force he sought to quell. The smoke, it worked, Cillian panted, a wild, exhausted laugh caught in his throat. Iogen nodded, his gray eyes gleaming in the dark. It was a prayer in a language the stones and trees remember. He will have seen it. He will be moving. He gripped Cillian's shoulder. "But you cannot go back. You are a hunted man now, by both the cross and the sword. Your path leads only forward, into the green." Cillian knew it was true. The monastery, his cell, his life of quiet conflict, all were ash now. Us consumed us. The oak trunk, he had been forged in the fire of Hereward's wrath into something new. Not just a carver, but a herald, a conspirator, a living bridge between the world of men and the awakening guardian. His journey into the deep, true forest, hinted at since the first chapter, now began in earnest. He was leaving the map of lies behind, to navigate the uncharted, verdant truth of the green man's realm. The rooted path. The forest that swallowed Cillian and Iogen was not the tame woodland of monastery folklore or the managed hunting preserve of a thane. This was the coil fjord, the true wood, a primordial entity that had never known the kiss of an axe or the boundary of a hedge. The air, thick
and cool, tasted of decaying cedar and wet stone. Moonlight, which had illuminated the hill, failed to penetrate the triple canopy above. Here, darkness was a tangible presence, a velvet cloak woven from 1,000 shades of black and deep green. They moved by feel and by Iogun's unerring instinct, their progress marked by the soft crush of centuries of leaf litter underfoot and the occasional plaintive hoot of an owl far overhead. Cillian's monastic robes, already torn from the escape, became a hindrance, snagging on claw-like branches and soaking up the moisture from dripping ferns. After an hour of arduous travel, Iogun stopped beside a mossy outcrop. From a leather satchel he carried, he produced a bundle of simple clothing: a tunic of undyed, rough-spun wool, leggings of deer hide, and a worn but sturdy cloak. "You cannot walk the rooted path dressed for a cell," he said simply. "The forest knows its own. It will snag the pride of the outsider." Stripping off the heavy, damp robe felt like shedding a skin, the skin of Brother Cillian, the conflicted monk. The new clothes were coarse but functional, and they carried the faint, clean scent of wood smoke and pine. When he pulled the cloak around his shoulders, he felt a shift, not just in comfort, but in identity. He was becoming something else, something the rules of the chapter house could not define. Iogun led him deeper. They followed no path a human eye could discern, but the young forester moved with a confident grammar, reading the slant of a tree's growth, the pattern of moss on stone, the subtle whisper of air currents through specific gullies. They passed through a stand of enormous columnar pines, where the silence was so profound Cillian could hear the blood singing in his own ears. They forded a stream whose water was so cold it burned, and so clear he could see the speckled trout sleeping like living stones in its depths. As they walked, Iogun spoke in a low, steady voice, not as a guide giving instruction, but as one sharing the deepest truths of his world. "The path we walk is not on the ground," he said, his hand brushing the trunk of a massive beech. "It is in the connection. This beech shares root talk with the holly on the ridge. The holly knows the fox's den. The fox drinks from the stream we crossed. To know one true thing is to know the map of everything if you listen to the links." Cillian listened. He began to hear not just noise, but conversation. The creak of a branch was not random. It was a report on the wind's weight. The sudden silence of frogs in a nearby bog was an alarm passed through the water. The forest was a living network, pulsing with silent, urgent communication. He was no longer an observer. He was immersed in the medium of the message. After several hours, the character of the woodland changed again. The trees grew even larger, their trunks bearded with cascading mosses and strange leathery fungi that glowed with a faint foxfire luminescence. The air grew warmer, damper, and carried a rich, loamy scent that spoke of tremendous age and slow, constant decay, giving birth to relentless life.
They entered a valley hidden between folds of land, a place so secluded it seemed to exist outside of time. This was the Claes non Dawene, the hollow of the people. It was not a village in any sense Killian knew. There were no straight lines, no cleared fields, no central hall. Instead, low, round houses with walls of woven wattle and roofs of living sod nestled into the hillsides, almost indistinguishable from the land itself. Smoke curled from hidden chimneys, blending with the valley's natural mist. Small terraced gardens followed the contours of the land, growing a riotous mix of barley, kale, and medicinal herbs. Fruit trees, ancient and gnarled, grew in seeming disorder, but their placement caught the sun perfectly. The people who emerged to greet them moved with the same quiet grace as Yogan. They wore simple clothes dyed with roots and berries, their faces etched by weather and wisdom rather than hardship. Their eyes, old and young alike, held a familiar, knowing depth, the same depth he had seen in Nessa, and a reflection of the green man's own ancient gaze. They did not crowd around, but observed with a respectful curiosity. An elder woman, her hair a cloud of white, approached. She was introduced as Bronach, the bean Fisa, the wise woman of the hollow. Her eyes, a startling blue despite her age, scanned Killian from head to toe, not assessing his threat, but reading the story written in his stance, his hands, the new but ill-fitting clothes. "The carver who remembered," she said, her voice like dry leaves stirred by a gentle wind. "We saw your prayer in the smoke. It was a good shaping." She took his hands, turning them over to examine the fresh blisters and old calluses. "The land accepts your offering, but your journey is not to a safe haven. You have brought the storm's eye with you." She led him to one of the round houses. Inside, it was warm and smoky, lit by a central fire pit. The walls were hung with drying herbs, baskets of nuts, and intricately woven baskets. It felt organic, a substance of a burrow or a nest. He was given a bowl of rich stew, full of wild mushrooms, tender nettles, and chunks of venison. As he ate, the fatigue of the escape and the emotional tumult of the past days crashed over him. He was safe, for the moment, but he was also a fugitive, a beacon for Hereward's wrath. "Hereward will come," Killian said, the certainty cold in his gut. "He cannot let this stand. The humiliation is too public." Bronach nodded, stirring the fire with a stick. "He will, but he will not find the hollow by following trails. He will have to burn the forest itself to find us. And to do that, he must enter the true wood, where every tree is an ally to the guardian, and every shadow a hiding place." She fixed him with her blue eyes. "Your coming is the next turn in the cycle. The green man awakened to the memory you carved. He displayed his power to the one who would deny it. Now, the conflict moves from symbol to substance. Hereward will bring iron and fire. The guardian will bring root and storm. And you, carver, must decide where you stand in the green tide." "I have already chosen,"
Cillian said, his voice firm. I stood in his hall and defied him with a gouge. I ran from his sword. There is no going back. Choosing a side is one thing, Bronick said. Becoming a weapon of that side is another. You have a skill beyond carving wood. You have a connection to him. You felt the bud warm. You heard the chorus. This makes you a conduit. She leaned forward. The green man is the spirit of the whole, the vast, slow turn of seasons. He is not a general. He does not plan battles. He is the forest's will to live. To confront a focused human hatred, that will may need a focal point, a voice that can speak in terms a human heart understands, even as it channels the power of the untamed world. Cillian understood. He was to be more than a herald. He was to be an interpreter, a priest of a religion without dogma, a vessel. The thought was terrifying. Who was he, a failed monk, a conflicted soul, to bear such a burden? As if reading his thoughts, Iogen spoke from the doorway. You are not being asked to be a saint or a hero. You are being asked to be a bridge. Your hands know the shape of things. Now you must help shape the outcome. That night, sleeping on a bed of fragrant, dried ferns, Cillian dreamed not with images, but with sensations. He felt the deep, thirsty pull of roots through miles of dark soil. He felt the explosive joy of a bud bursting its scales. He felt the patient, grinding resistance of stone against the insistence of a searching root tip. He felt the vast, interconnected web of life in the valley, the sleep of the people, the watchful dreams of the wolves on the ridge, the silent growth of the lichen on the north-facing rocks. He was not separate. He was a node in the network, a point where the human and the green intersected. He awoke at dawn to the sound of bird song so dense and varied it was like a symphony. Light filtered through the smoke hole, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. He stepped outside. The hollow was bathed in soft, gold-green light. The sense of peace was profound, but it was not a passive peace. It was the peace of a deep, collective breath held before a plunge. The people went about their tasks, weaving, grinding grain, tending gardens, with a serene efficiency. They knew what was coming. They had lived on the edge of eradication for generations. The awakening of the green man was not just a miracle. It was a mobilization order. Bronick approached him, holding a small clay bowl filled with dark paste. For your hands, she said, a poultice of comfrey and plantain. They must be ready. Your skill will be needed, not in wood, but in helping to prepare the defenses of a living world. As she applied the cool, healing paste to his blisters, Cillian looked out from the hidden hollow. He saw the forest not as a hiding place, but as a sovereign nation preparing for siege. The rooted path had led him to its heart. Now he had to learn how to fight for it. The conflict had left the realm of symbols and smoke. It was coming to the trees themselves, and he would have to carve his place in the coming storm, not with a chisel, but with his very loyalty. The forging of the adder.
The tranquility of the hollow was a practiced illusion, a deep breath held in the face of the approaching storm. In the days following Cillian's arrival, the hidden community moved with a quiet, purposeful urgency. They were not preparing for a conventional war. There were no stockpiles of spears, no forging of sword blades. Their arsenal was the forest itself, and their strategy was one of misdirection, resilience, and profound intimacy with the land. Cillian's hands healed under Bronic's ministrations, the comfrey paste drawing out the inflammation and toughening the skin. He was put to work, not as a carver, but as a student. Aogan and the other hunters taught him the language of the true wood in earnest. He learned to distinguish the warning chatter of a jay from its casual gossip, to read the meaning behind the sudden stillness of the woodcock. He was shown how to move without breaking a twig, how to step on stone or moss to leave no trace, how to use the wind's direction to mask his scent. More crucially, he was taught the green warcraft of the hollow. With the women, he gathered specific plants, the sticky, crimson juice of bloodroot that could blind and sicken, the delicate, lethal petals of monkshood, the thorny runners of a particular bramble that grew unnaturally strong and sharp when whispered to in the old tongue. These were not poisons for assassination, but ingredients for deterrence, to be smeared on stakes, woven into hidden snares at the valley's secret entrances, to make the very undergrowth a painful, bewildering adversary. Bronic herself took him to the oldest places. She showed him a spring that bubbled from a cleft in a rock, its water ice-cold and clear. "The Tobar Benaitha, the blessed well," she murmured. "Its water remembers the first rain. We will use it to bless the thresholds, to make them unseen to eyes filled with malice." She had him help her carve Ogham symbols, the ancient tree alphabet, into living bark at the 7 approaches to the hollow, not to create a magical wall, but to deepen the existing song of the place, to make it resonate with a protective harmony that would disorient and repel those with violence in their hearts. Throughout this, Cillian felt the green man's presence like a deepening drumbeat in the earth. The guardian did not give orders or appear in visions. His influence was ambient, catalytic. The plants they gathered were more potent. The connections between the creatures of the wood seemed heightened. Deer would appear to lead them away from a wolf's territory, or a flock of crossbills would erupt in warning cries minutes before a stranger's approach was physically detectable. The forest was rallying, its intelligence focusing. One evening, a week after his arrival, the signal came. Eogan returned from a scouting trip to the forest's edge, his gray eyes grave. Hereward is moving. He's not trying to find paths, he's making one. He has gathered every able-bodied man from his settlements. They have axes, billhooks, and torches. They are cutting a broad swath from his hill eastward, straight toward the hearthwood. He is burning what he cuts. He means to carve a road of ash right to us. A cold knot tightened in Cillian's stomach. This was the brute force response he had feared. Hereward had abandoned subtlety and strategy. He would solve the problem of the mystical forest the way he solved all problems, by reduction, by conversion of the complex into the simple, of life into fuel.
Bronach called the hollow together. There was no panic, only a solemn acceptance. "The Theg chooses the realm of fire and iron," she said, her voice carrying in the twilight. "We are of the realm of root and leaf. We will not meet his fire with fire. We will meet it with depth, with patience, with the turning of his strength against him." The plan was not to defend the hollow directly. It was to make the journey toward it a descent into a green nightmare for Hereward's men. Working in the deep night, guided by starlight and an uncanny sense of touch, the people of the hollow, with Cillian among them, became ghosts in the woods. They did not dig pits or build barricades. They persuaded. Following Eogan's directions, they visited the areas ahead of the advancing axe line. Cillian watched, awestruck, as Bronach and the elders would kneel before certain ancient, towering trees, a patriarch oak, a massive beech, a grove of thick pines. They would place their hands on the bark and sing in a low, guttural tongue, not a song of words, but of vibrations, of hums and clicks that seemed to speak directly to the sapwood. They were not commanding, they were warning. They were telling the forest of the coming fire. The response was subtle but profound. The next day, Eogan reported that where the axemen worked, the wood had changed. Oak that should have split cleanly under the axe now gripped the blades, twisting them, snapping handles with a sound like gunshots. Vines of wild grape and old man's beard, usually limp, had woven themselves into dense, springy nets between trees, forcing the men to hack endlessly at resilient greenery. Wasps, unusually aggressive, had built paper nests overnight in the very stumps the men paused near. The forest was not fighting back with violence. It was fighting back with inconvenience, with 100 tiny, draining, morale-sapping defenses. Cillian's role evolved. Bronach gave him a new task. Using a lump of charcoal from the hearth and sheets of smoothed birch bark, he was to map the advancing destruction. But this was no map for human eyes. It was a diagnostic chart for the forest. Using symbols Eogan and Bronach taught him, a spiral for a place of deep-rooted resistance, a wavy line for a stream that could be encouraged to flood, a starburst for a stand of brittle, resinous pine that would burn too fiercely and unpredictably. He created a living diagram of the battlefront. Runners, children small and silent as foxes, would take these bark maps deep into the woods, leaving them at the feet of certain moss-crowned stones or in the hollows of specific trees, places the green man's influence was strongest. It was a communication system, a way to focus the land's diffuse will, and it worked. Where Cillian's map indicated a place where the axemen were making progress, strange things would occur. The very soil would seem to become clinging mud, swallowing boots to the knee. Swarms of midges would descend, not biting, but forming a blinding, choking cloud. Or a sudden, localized rain shower would drench the torches and make the wood too wet to burn easily. Cillian was no longer just a carver or a refugee. He was the cartographer of the wild's resistance,
translating human aggression into a language the ecosystem could understand. He felt the immense, slow intellect of the green man working through his simple symbols, a partnership forming between human ingenuity and ancient terrestrial power. But Hereward was relentless, and his method was brutally simple. He drove his men hard, using the lash and the promise of pillage. The road of ash crept forward, a bleeding, smoking scar on the green flesh of the world. The distant sound of axes, the smell of smoke, became a constant, grim accompaniment to life in the hollow. The tension reached a breaking point 3 days later. The axe line had reached the Kayonche, the sighing bog, a vast, treacherous wetland that guarded the eastern approaches to the hollow's valley. It was a natural barrier, but Hereward, in his fury, commanded his men to bridge it with felled trees.
That night, standing at the edge of the hollow, looking east, Cillian saw an ominous, flickering orange glow staining the low clouds. The smell of peat smoke was strong. They were burning the bog itself. Branach stood beside him, her face etched with sorrow and fury. He burns the memory of the land. Peat is centuries of compressed life. He is burning time itself. She turned to Cillian, her blue eyes blazing. The persuasion is not enough. The land is wounded. It needs a sharper answer. You must go to the heart. You must speak to him. Not us, a spirit in the trees, but us, the will of the wounded earth. You must ask for the forging of the adder. The adder? Cillian asked. The gentle spring is past, Branach said, her voice hard. When the land is cut, it does not just sigh, it strikes. The adder is the biting frost after a false thaw, the sudden flood that washes away the careless camp, the lightning that finds the tall, proud tree. It is the focused wrath of the natural world. You, who carry his bud, who speak through his maps, you must be the one to ask for it. The green man embodies the cycle, but even the cycle has its moments of sharp correction. We have reached that moment. Cillian looked from the distant, ugly glow to the serene, threatened hollow. The path of the gentle carver was at its end. The rooted path now led to a precipice. He had to go to the green man, not for solace, but to become the vessel for a storm. He nodded, a heavy resolve settling in his bones. The forging was about to begin. The heart of the wild. The journey to the heart was not a matter of traversing distance, but of surrendering to a deeper stratum of existence. Aogon led Cillian not east toward the burning bog, but west, deeper into the oldest, most silent part of the true wood. The air grew denser, richer with oxygen and the scent of things growing and dying on a timescale that dwarfed human centuries. The light beneath the canopy was a perpetual, green-tinged twilight, filtered through layers of leaves older than kingdoms. They walked for hours, their passage marked only by the soft give of sphagnum moss, and the occasional, respectful detour around the buttressed roots of a tree so large it seemed a landform unto itself. The chorus of the forest here was not the lively symphony of the outer woods, but a deep, resonant hum, a vibration felt in the marrow, the sound of slow growth, of continents of mycelium conversing beneath their feet, of stone being patiently persuaded into soil. Finally, they reached a place where the trees themselves formed a natural archway. Two colossal oaks, their trunks fused at the base from some ancient embrace, leaned toward each other, creating a Gothic portal of living wood. Beyond it, all sound from the outside world ceased. The very quality of the air changed. It was cooler, charged with a static potential, like the moment before a lightning strike. "This is as far as I go," Iogen whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "The heart is within. You must walk alone. Remember what Branagh said. You are not asking for a favor. You are presenting a wound. You are the nerve ending of the forest, carrying the pain of the burn. Show him." Killian stepped through the arch. The space beyond was not a clearing, but a cathedral. A circle of stones, not hewn by human hands, but shaped by glacial patience, stood in a rough ring. At its center grew a single, impossible tree. It was neither oak, nor yew, nor ash, but a fusion of all of them. Its bark shifted in patches from the rugged gray of oak to the smooth blood-red peel of yew, to the pale diamond-patterned bark of ash. Its leaves were of every shape, needled, palmate, simple, compound, all growing in harmonious profusion from the same massive bole. Its roots, exposed above the moss, like great knuckled fingers, gripped the stones and plunged into the earth with an anchor's finality. This was not a manifestation of the Green Man. This was the Green Man. The localized spirit of the hill, the yew grove, the wandering guardian. These were tendrils, fingers, thoughts. This was the heart-mind, the rooted, immovable core of his being. Killian approached, each footfall silent on the thick moss. He felt microscopic, a fleeting mote of consciousness before an entity that measured time in the rise and fall of mountains. He did not kneel, he stood, and from his pouch he drew not the now dormant bud, but the birch-bark maps he had made. He held them out, the charcoal symbols stark against the pale bark. "I bring news of a wound," he said, his voice sounding small and brittle in the vast listening silence. "The one who fears you cuts a road of fire. He burns the living wood. He burns the memory of the bog. He seeks to turn the song of this place into the silence of ash." He laid the maps at the base of the great tree, among its roots. He described in plain, unadorned words what he had seen and heard. The bite of the axes, the roar of the flames, the terror of the animals fleeing, the despair in Branagh's eyes, the grim determination of the Hollow's people. He spoke of Hereward's pale, hate-filled eyes, his belief that the wild was a thing to be broken and owned. He did not plead, he testified. For a long time, nothing happened.
The deep hum continued. The dappled light shifted imperceptibly. Then the air grew heavy. The great tree before him seemed to draw a breath, and the entire cathedral forest inhaled with it. The moss at his feet darkened with a sudden weeping moisture. From the bark of the heart tree, a slow, viscous sap began to flow. Not the clear sap of spring, but a dark, amber fluid that held the smoky scent of ancient resin and the metallic tang of ozone. The roots around the maps began to move, not with speed, but with a tectonic, inevitable slowness. They crept over the birch bark, not crushing it, but absorbing it. The charcoal lines seemed to bleed into the wood, becoming dark veins in the root's surface. The tree was reading the pain he had charted. Then a voice spoke. It had no source. It was not a chorus of leaves, nor a whisper of roots. It was the voice of the place itself, a sound composed of grinding stone, rushing groundwater, the crack of frost-split rock, and the low groan of earth under its own weight. Pain. The word was not heard, it was experienced. Cillian felt a phantom ache in his own bones, a searing heat on his skin, a profound, choking grief for lost green things. He gasped, staggering under the weight of the sensation. The cycle is growth, flowering, decay, rest. This is not decay. This is amputation. The voice held a cold, terrible fury. This was not the gentle guardian of spring. This was the implacable judge of natural law violated. You carry my seed within you. You have spoken for the wounded. You ask for the adder's bite. It was not a question. Cillian straightened, meeting the presence that swirled around the heart tree. I do not ask for myself. I ask for the hollow, for the bog, for every root in the path of his fire. He understands only one language. He must be shown that his fire can be answered by a flood, his axe by a landslide, his arrogance by the simple, indifferent power of the world he thinks he rules. A root, thick as Cillian's thigh, rose from the moss before him. Its tip split, and from within something was offered. Not a seed this time. It was a thorn. A single black thorn, as long as a man's finger, curved like a sickle moon, its surface gleaming with a cruel, liquid sharpness. It pulsed with a deep, violet light, the color of a bruise, of a storm cloud at dusk. Take this. It is a fragment of the adder's tooth. Carry it to the wound. Where you plant it, the land's anger will focus. The patience of stone will end. The yielding of water will cease. It will forge a response in the image of the injury. Cillian reached out. His fingers closed around the thorn. It was cold, colder than ice, a cold that burned. The moment he touched it, a jolt went through him, a vision swift and terrifying. He saw a hillside sheared away, mud and stone engulfing a road. He saw a river bursting its banks with a roar, scouring a cleared path down to bedrock. He saw wind, not as a breeze, but as a fist, snapping the masts of men's ambitions like dry twigs. It was not guidance toward violence, but a vision of consequence, of the ecosystem's immune response triggered to a fever pitch. You are the point of contact. The thorn knows the way. Go. The presence began to recede, the crushing weight lifting from the air. The heart tree's sap flow slowed. The deep hum returned to its normal, eternal register. The audience was over. Cillian turned, the thorn clutched in his hand, its cold seeping into his palm, a tangible mandate. He walked back through the arch of oaks where Iogen waited. The forester took one look at his face, then at the thorn, and his own expression hardened into one of solemn resolve. He asked no questions. The burning has reached the far edge of the sighing bog, Iogen reported. They are trying to cross. They are throwing felled trees into the mire, making a causeway of dead wood. Then that is where we go, Cillian said, his voice steadier than he felt. The fragile carver was gone, burned away in the heart's presence. What remained was a determined, focused instrument. He was no longer just mapping the resistance. He was to be the needle that directed the fever. Their return journey was a forced march, urgency lending speed to their feet. They moved not with stealth now, but with purpose. The forest itself seeming to part before them, offering the straightest lines. As they drew nearer to the eastern front, the signs of devastation worsened. The air grew thick and acrid with smoke. The cheerful birdsong was replaced by the cries of distressed crows and the ominous crackle of flames. They passed trees blackened and skeletal, their leaves Huatsa-Hui-Jin. From a high rocky ridge, they finally looked down upon the sighing bog. It was a scene from a pit of nightmares. A swath of the beautiful, complex wetland, a mosaic of moss hummocks, dark pools, and rare insect-eating plants, was a charred, smoking wasteland. A crude, unstable-looking causeway of muddy, half-burnt logs stretched from the solid ground into the surviving bog. On the far side, Hereward's camp was a blight of tents and campfires. Men, tiny at this distance, labored to extend the bridge of destruction. The glow of their torches and the fires at the bog's edge painted the scene in hellish shades. Cillian's hand tightened around the thorn. The cold had spread up his arm, a constant chilling reminder of his task. The wound was below. The heart had given him the medicine, a medicine of terrible purgative force. "This is the place," he murmured, "where the injury is deepest, where his violation is most complete." Iogen nodded, his face grim. "How do we plant it?" "The area is swarming with his men." Cillian looked at the thorn, then at the wounded bog. The thorn knew the way. He didn't need to plant it in the center of the camp. He needed to plant it in the heart of the injury itself, in the burnt, vulnerable border between the living bog and Hereward's dead road. "We wait for full dark," Cillian said, "and then we give the land back its tooth."
The Adder's Strike. Darkness, when it fell, was not a true cloak over the bog. The hellish glow from the still smoldering peat and the campfires of Hereward's men cast a flickering, infernal light, painting the world in shifting oranges and deep, impenetrable blacks. The air was a foul brew of wet ash, burnt vegetation, and the greasy smell of roasting meat from the camp. The natural symphony of the bog, the croak of frogs, the whir of insects, was gone, replaced by the distant shouts of men, the thud of axes, and the relentless, hungry hiss of fire meeting damp earth. Cillian and Ogun were two shadows among many, but they were shadows that belonged. They moved with the silence of the deepest wood, using the contours of the unburnt land, the remaining stands of sedge and alder, us their screen. The cold from the thorn in Cillian's grip had settled into a dull ache, a compass needle pointing inexorably toward the epicenter of the violation. They reached the edge of the burnt zone. The transition was stark. One step on resilient, spongy moss alive with tiny glowing fungi. The next on crunchy, carbonized earth that collapsed into ashy powder. The heat from the still smoldering peat beneath was a physical wall. Before them stretched the makeshift causeway, a grotesque spine of blackened logs, mud, and debris laid across the wounded belly of the bog. "There," Eogan whispered, pointing to a spot near the midpoint of the causeway, where the burnt ground met the newer, wetter section of the bog that was still fighting back. It was a place of maximum tension, where Hereward's violence was actively intruding upon the surviving ecosystem. A team of men, visible as moving silhouettes against the fires behind them, was heaving another log into the mire, their curses carried on the foul air. Cillian's heart thundered. To plant the thorn there meant crossing open, scorched ground under the very noses of the laborers. It was suicide. But the thorn pulsed in his hand, a single, insistent beat of cold. It wanted to be there. It was drawn to the wound like a magnet. "Create a distraction," Cillian said, his mind clicking into a cold, clear logic. At the far end of the causeway, something to draw their eyes just for a minute. Eogan's gray eyes gleamed. He nodded, a hunter's smile touching his lips. He melted away into the darkness, circling wide toward the camp end of the bog. Cillian waited, each second an eternity. He focused on the thorn, trying to commune with its intent. He was not its master. He was its courier. His job was delivery. A sudden commotion erupted from the direction of the camp. Shouts of alarm, the crash of a falling stack of firewood, the panicked whinny of a horse. Eogan's work. The men at the midpoint of the causeway straightened up, peering toward the noise. Their supervisor barked an order, and a few of them began trudging back toward camp to investigate. Now. Cillian moved. He did not run. Running would create noise and silhouette him against the glow. He walked, swiftly but smoothly, directly onto the scorched earth. The heat through his leather soles was intense. Ash puffed around his feet, but the ground was firm, if treacherous. He kept his eyes on the spot, a dark seam where the burnt crust met the glistening, peat-black water of the living bog. He reached the edge of the causeway. The reek of burnt peat and mud was overwhelming. He could hear the distracted voices of the remaining men not 50 paces away, arguing about the disturbance. He dropped to his knees. The mud here was a mixture of cold, watery peat and warm ash. He didn't dig. He simply pressed the thorn, point first, into that seam, at the very root of the injury, where death met struggling life. He pushed it deep until the cold violet light was extinguished beneath the mud. As he did, he poured his intention into the act, not with words, but with the images the heart had shown him. The landslide, the flood, the breaking wind. This is the point, he thought. Here is your tooth. Bite. The moment the thorn was fully submerged, a shock wave passed through the ground. It was not a physical tremor, but a qualitative shift. The very air seemed to suck in a breath. The distant shouts from the camp faltered. For a heartbeat, there was a silence so profound it was louder than any noise. Then, the bog sighed. It was the sound that gave the place its name, but magnified 1,000-fold. A vast, wet, groaning exhalation from deep within the earth. The mud around Cillian's hands began to bubble. Not with heat, but with a frenetic, churning life. The water, which had been still and black, began to swirl, forming small, sucking vortexes. Cillian scrambled back, his mission complete. He retreated to the cover of the unburnt sedge, just as the men on the causeway, now thoroughly spooked, turned their attention back to their work. They saw nothing but the restless bog. For a few minutes, nothing more happened. The men, nervous, returned to heaving their log. Cillian, hidden and trembling with adrenaline, watched. Then the adder struck. It began with the water. The vortexes grew, merging into a single, wide whirlpool that opened in the bog directly adjacent to the causeway. With a sound like a giant gulping, the water level on that side began to drop rapidly, as if a plug had been pulled. The causeway, built on unstable mud and debris, groaned. The log the men were working on tilted suddenly, sliding into the newly created sinkhole with a great splash, taking 2 screaming men with it. Before the others could react, the bog responded from the other direction. The water that had drained away now returned, not as a gentle rise, but as a wave. It surged up from the depths of the peat, a wall of cold, peat-brown water and semi-liquid mud, 3 feet high, rolling with terrifying speed across the surface of the bog. It hit the causeway like a hammer. The carefully laid logs were lifted like twigs, snapped and scattered. Men were swept off their feet, their cries cut short as the thick, cloying mire swallowed them. The wave traveled the length of the causeway, dissolving it into chaotic flotsam, before expending its energy against the far bank in a slap that echoed across the wasted landscape. But the adder was not done. The ground, destabilized by the sudden hydraulic violence, began to move. A section of the burnt, undercut bank on the near side, where Cillian had stood moments before, slumped into the bog with a sound like a collapsing lung. Then another.
A landslide of ashy liquid earth began to feed into the churning water, widening the gap between Hereward's men and the far shore into an impassable boiling channel of mud and debris. From the camp, horns blared in panic. Torches swarmed like angry fireflies, but there was nothing to fight, no enemy to charge. The land itself had turned against them. And then came the wind. It rose from nowhere, howling down from the high woods, funneled by the terrain straight into the camp.
It was not a natural wind. It was a focused, punishing gale. It ripped tents from their pegs, sent sparks and embers from the campfires flying in a blinding, burning storm, and extinguished half the torches, plunging sections of the camp into chaotic darkness. Men ran, blinded by ash and panic, crashing into each other, stumbling into the treacherous ground at the bog's edge. Cillian watched, awe and a profound, chilling horror warring within him. This was not a battle. It was an ecological correction. The heart's response was precise, devastating, and utterly indifferent to the human drama playing out within it. It was the land saying, "This far and no further." Eogon reappeared at his side, his face pale in the erratic light. "It is done," he said, his voice hushed. Together they retreated, leaving behind a scene of utter rout. The causeway was gone. Dozens of men were missing, claimed by the bog. The camp was in ruins, battered by its own scattered fire and demoralized by an enemy they could not comprehend. Hereward's direct assault was broken, not by an army, but by a thorn and the furious, focused will of a wounded world. As they moved back into the sanctuary of the deep woods, the unnatural wind died as suddenly as it had risen. The bog's churning slowed to a simmer. An eerie quiet returned, broken only by the distant, panicked shouts from the shattered camp and the satisfied chuckle of water finding new channels. Cillian looked at his mud-caked hand, the one that had planted the thorn. It felt numb, empty. He had been the needle. He had delivered the fever. The adder had struck, and the balance, in its most terrible form, had been restored. The victory was absolute, but it tasted of peat and cold ashes. The path ahead was no longer about survival, but about the consequences of unleashing a power that answered to laws older than pity. The bitter harvest. The retreat to the hollow was a somber procession through a forest that seemed to hold its breath. The triumphant, vengeant energy that had propelled them to the bog's edge had dissipated, leaving behind a hollowed-out silence in its wake. The green man's chorus was absent, replaced by a deep, watchful quiet, like the held breath of a giant. The air still carried the distant, acrid tang of smoke, but it was now laced with the damp, fecund smell of churned peat and disturbed earth, the scent of the adder's strike. Cillian moved like an automaton, his body functioning while his mind reeled in a separate, stunned chamber. The images played behind his eyes on a relentless loop, the surging wall of mud, the logs snapping like bones, the tiny flailing figures swallowed by the hungry mire, the camp consumed by its own scattered fire. He had wanted to stop Hereward, to protect the hollow. He had not imagined the clean, terrifying geometry of nature's retribution. There was no malice in it, which made it more terrible. It was simply cause and effect, scaled to a magnitude that dwarfed human pettiness. Eogon, walking beside him, was similarly withdrawn. The forester's usual grace was subdued, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, but seeing something else. He had created the distraction, but the scale of the response had clearly shaken him. This was beyond the hidden snares and whispered persuasions of the hollow's craft. This was the raw id of the land, provoked. They were met at the hidden entrance to the valley by Branach and a group of elders. Their faces, illuminated by the soft glow of rushlights, were not jubilant. They were grim, etched with a solemn understanding that bordered on grief. "The bog sighed its last sigh for them," Branach said, her blue eyes searching Killian's face. "We felt the shift. The land, it turned over in its sleep, and they were in the way." She placed a hand, cool and dry, on his muddy wrist. "You planted the thorn." It was not a question. Killian could only nod, his throat tight. "Then you have borne a heavy burden," she murmured. "Come, the hollow must hear, and you must rest." The people gathered in the central clearing around a low fire that seemed to burn more for light than warmth. There was no celebration. They listened in silence as Eogon gave a terse, unadorned report. The causeway destroyed, the camp in chaos, many men lost. Hereward's advance halted. When he finished, the silence stretched, heavy with unasked questions. An elder man named Fergus, his back bent like a wind-shaped hawthorn, spoke. "The adder's bite is a last resort. It leaves a scar upon the land as well. The bog will be changed. The spirits of that place are angered, uprooted. We have traded a burning for a drowning." He looked at Killian. "You were the hand that held the thorn. Do you feel its cold still?" Killian closed his eyes. He did. A remnant of the deep, bruise-purple chill lingered in his palm, a phantom tattoo. "I feel it," he whispered.
"It will fade," Branach said, "but the memory will not. You have been marked by the heart's fury. You are now a part of its deeper history." The discussion turned to practicalities. Scouts were sent to monitor the remains of Hereward's force. The hollow's defenses, the persuasive snares and blessed thresholds would remain. But the mood had changed. The victory felt Pyrrhic. They had defended their sanctuary, but at the cost of invoking a power that reminded them, starkly, that they too were tenants in a realm that could withdraw its grace in an instant. Killian retired to the roundhouse he shared with Eogan. He tried to sleep, but his dreams were not of roots and buds. They were of mud, cold and suffocating, rising to his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He awoke with a start, gasping for air, the taste of peat on his tongue. Dawn came, gray and muted. The hollow went about its tasks, but the usual gentle hum of industry was subdued. Later that morning, a scout returned. His report was unsettling. Hereward was not in retreat. The Theg had survived. His force was decimated, perhaps by half, and utterly broken in spirit. But Hereward himself, according to the scout who had crept close enough to see, was a changed man. Gone was the blustering, calculated rage. In its place was a cold, silent, focused madness. He had rallied the remnants of his men, not with speeches, but with a bleak, relentless will. They were not breaking camp. They were consolidating on the far side of the transformed bog, digging defensive ditches, building a crude palisade from the wreckage of their own causeway, and the few trees they could still safely fell. It was the action of a man who had lost everything but his objective. "He is not leaving," the scout said, his voice uneasy. "He is digging in, like a tick. He has given up on conquest. Now he seeks only to inflict a wound before he dies." Bronach's face grew hard. "A wounded bear is most dangerous when it has no thought of escape. It seeks only to take its enemy with it." Killian felt a new kind of dread, colder and more personal than the fear of axes. This was no longer about land or power. It was about hatred, refined in the furnace of humiliation and loss, distilled to its pure, poisonous essence. Hereward would not rest until the source of his ruin, the green magic, the hidden people, the carver monk who had been at the center of it all, was erased. "He will look for another way," Eogan said, staring into the fire. "Not a road for an army, a path for a dagger." The truth settled over the hollow like a frost. The adder had shattered the army, but it had forged the man into a more dangerous weapon, a fanatic with nothing left to lose. Days passed in a tense, watchful limbo. The hollow existed in a state of heightened alert, but the expected attack did not come. Hereward's fortified camp was a festering pustule on the edge of the wood, but it made no move. This inactivity was more unnerving than an assault. Killian, seeking purpose, returned to carving. He found a piece of dry, silvered bog oak, wood that had been preserved in the peat for centuries, hard as iron. He did not know what he was making. His hands, guided by a need for atonement or understanding, began to shape it. He carved not the green man, nor maps, but the bog itself. The tangled roots of sedge, the delicate tracery of a fern, the round, watchful eye of a pool. He carved the memory of the place before the fire, a memorial in ancient wood. One evening, as he worked by the light of the central fire, Bronach came to sit with him. She watched his hands for a long time. "You carve a eulogy," she said softly. "I carve what was lost," he replied, not looking up. "More was lost than peat and water," she said. "Innocence, perhaps. The idea that the wild's protection is gentle." She sighed. "The green man brings the spring, but spring washes away the weak with the thaw. He is not a God of comfort. He is a God of process, and process has no mercy, only inevitability. "Did I choose rightly?" Killian asked, the question bursting from him. To ask for the adder? To unleash that indifference? Branagh was silent for a long moment. "You presented a wound. The heart prescribed the medicine. The land would have reacted in time, in its own way. You focused its anger, sped its justice. You saved the hollow, likely. But justice and mercy are not sisters. They are distant cousins who seldom meet." She placed a gnarled hand on the half-carved bog oak. "The harvest of your choice is this: safety laced with guilt. A saved home that now knows the terrible price of its salvation. This is the bitter fruit. It must be eaten, or it will poison you from within." Killian put down his tools. The carving in his lap was a ghost of a lost world. He felt the truth of her words. The victory was real. The hollow stood. The forest's heart beat on.
But a part of his own heart had been frozen by the thorn's cold, and warmed now only by the uncomfortable heat of a hard-won, tragic knowledge. The following morning, the crisis took its final, personal turn. A child from the hollow, a girl of no more than 7 who had been gathering goose eggs near the valley's western rim, came running back, her face white. In her hand, she clutched not an egg, but a strip of fine, blood-red wool, torn and muddy. Tied to it was a piece of shaped amber. It was the torque from Lord Hereward's throat, the one he had worn the day he first came to the monastery. It had been left deliberately on a stone at the entrance to a hidden deer trail, a trail that led not to the front of the hollow, but to its soft, vulnerable underbelly. With the torque was a message, burned onto a slip of birch bark with a hot knife. The writing was crude, the Saxon runes slashed with fury. "A life for a life, the carver for the rest. Bring him to the stone by dusk, or I burn my way to you, and your children will choke on the smoke." It was signed with a single symbol, a stylized axe. Hereward had found his dagger's path, and he had pointed it directly at Killian's heart. The conflict had narrowed from armies and ecosystems to a single, terrible transaction. The bitter harvest was here, and Killian was the ripe grain upon the stalk. The last turning. The hollow held a council under a sky the color of tarnished lead. The atmosphere, previously tinged with sorrow and watchfulness, now crackled with a protective, ferocious energy. Hereward's ultimatum had transformed abstract threat into intimate peril. He was not promising vague destruction. He was promising to murder their children, and he had marked the trail he would take to do it. Fergus, the bent elder, spoke first, his voice like stones grinding. "We do not bargain with mad wolves. We sharpen our spears. He has 30 broken men. We have the forest." But Branagh shook her head, her white hair a cloud of dissent. "He is not a wolf. He is a man with nothing to lose, and fire. He does not need to defeat us. He only needs to reach the valley rim with a torch. A strong east wind and our homes are tinder, our children. She did not finish the sentence. The image was enough. Iogen stood, his body taut. Then we meet him on the trail. We ambush his party. We kill him. And if we fail? Killian's voice cut through the debate, quiet but carrying. All eyes turned to him. He held the strip of wool with the amber torque. It felt heavy, a lodestone of hatred. If one of his men gets through, if the wind turns. He looked around at the faces of the hollow, the fierce mothers, the watchful elders, the children peeking from behind doorways. These were the people he had fought for, the reason he had planted the thorn. To bring the adder's wrath down upon their heads now would be the ultimate betrayal. He does not want the hollow, not truly. He wants the source of his humiliation. He wants the story to end with his victory. He wants me. You will not go, Bronak said, but her words lacked force. She knew the logic of sacrifice, the cruel calculus of the greater good. It was written in the oldest stories of their people. He will burn his way here if I don't, Cillian said, the certainty cold and clear within him. This is the last turn of the cycle he started. My carving awoke the green man. My map deceived him. My thorn broke his army. The thread of this story ties his ruin to my hands. I am the knot. To untie it, the knot must be offered up. A profound silence followed. It was not agreement, but a horrified recognition of the inevitable shape of the narrative. The hero's journey, it seemed, did not end in a hall of celebration, but on a lonely stone at the forest's edge. I will not go to die, Cillian continued, a strange calm settling over him. I go to end the story, but I will not go as a sacrificial lamb. I will go as the carver, us the rememberer. He looked at Bronak. Give me the things I need. In the hours that remained until dusk, Cillian prepared. He did not put on armor or take a weapon. He bathed in the waters of the blessed well, washing the ash and mud from his skin. He put on the simple tunic and leggings of the hollow. Then he went to his few possessions. He took his personal carving of the Rowan Guardian from its hiding place. He took his small, sharp flensing knife, used for fine detail work. Finally, he went to Bronak's house and asked for 3 things. A handful of rich soil from the heart of the hollow's herb garden, a vial of water from the well, and a single living ember from the central fire, carried in a small clay pot. Bronak provided them without question, her wise eyes understanding. He was not gathering weapons, he was gathering sacraments. As the sun began its descent, casting long, melancholy shadows, Cillian stood at the entrance to the deer trail. The people of the hollow gathered. They did not weep or protest. They stood in a silent, solemn line, their hands open at their sides, a gesture of release and respect. Iogen stepped forward, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. He pressed his forehead against Cillian. "Walk with the roots under your feet," he whispered, the traditional blessing for a journey. "And may the sky hold you," Cillian replied, the response feeling more final than any farewell. He turned and walked into the trees alone. The deer trail was a narrow ribbon of twilight. He walked slowly, deliberately, feeling the soil under his feet, listening to the evening birdsong. He felt no fear, only a vast, clear purpose. He was not going to a battle, he was going to a conclusion. He reached the stone, a large, lichen-covered granite boulder. Alayhi salam, the last light was leaching from the sky. He did not wait passively, he knelt. With his knife, he cut a small, shallow groove in the top of the stone. Into it, he placed the handful of hollow soil. He sprinkled it with the blessed well water. Then, carefully, he tipped the living ember from its clay pot onto the damp earth. It hissed, sending up a thin plume of scented smoke that carried the essence of the hidden valley out into the darkening woods. He planted the small rowan carving firmly in the center of this tiny makeshift hearth. He was declaring an embassy. This stone was now an extension of the hollow, a fragment of its soul placed on the contested border. He had just finished when they came, not with a clamor, but with the grim, shuffling tread of exhausted, broken men. 10 of them emerged from the gloom, their clothes torn and soot-stained, their eyes hollow with trauma and a lingering, superstitious terror. In their center stood Hereward. The Then was barely recognizable. He had aged a decade in a week. His fine clothes were gone, replaced by a stained leather jerkin. His face was gaunt, the bones stark beneath the skin, but his pale eyes burned with a single, unwavering flame. They fixed on Cillian, and a tremor, part rage, part triumph, passed through him. "The sorcerer," Hereward rasped, his voice ruined by smoke and shouting. "The root worshipper. You come to pay your debt." Cillian stood, wiping his hands on his tunic. He felt calm, a rock in a stream of hatred. "I come to end the debt, Hereward. Your quarrel is with me. Let it end with me." Hereward let out a short, barking laugh that held no humor. "And nothing ends. My men are dead in the mud. My hall is defiled with weeds. My name is a jest. Do you think your death ends that? It is only the beginning of my satisfaction." He drew his sword, the steel gleaming dully in the twilight. "But it will be a start. I will take your head and plant it on a stake where my church was to stand. Let your leafy god watch it rot." Cillian did not flinch. He looked past the sword, past the madness, to the exhausted, terrified men behind Hereward. "And what of them?" he asked, his voice clear. "Will they die too, dragging your hatred deeper into a forest that has already beaten you? Will their wives and children sing songs of how they died for a lord's ruined pride?" The men shifted uneasily. Hereward's grip on his sword tightened. "They are loyal." "They are tired," Cillian countered. He took a step forward, his hands open at his sides. "I am here, your enemy, the Carver. You have your victory. Take it.
But let it be the last cut. Let the wound close. Go back. Rule the land you have, the fields and the streams that know your law. The deep wood is not for you. It never was. For a flickering instant, something like doubt, like a memory of the practical lord he had once been, crossed Hereward's ravaged face. Then it was gone, swamped by the black tide of his fixation. Pretty words from a man about to die. You speak for the trees? Then die on one. He raised his sword to strike. Killian did not move to defend himself. Instead, he closed his eyes and spoke, not a shout, but a firm, clear statement into the gathering dark. I am the rememberer. I stand at the threshold. I hold the soil of the safe place and the ember of its hearth. This story ends here. He thrust his hand into the tiny, smoldering hearth on the stone. The moment his fingers touched the living ember nestled in the hollow soil, a surge of energy, not hot, but vibrantly, powerfully alive, shot through him. It was the concentrated essence of the place he protected, its peace, its resilience, its fierce, quiet love. It was the antithesis of Hereward's barren hatred. The rowan carving beside his hand bloomed, not with leaves, but with a radiance of pure silver-green light. The light shot up, a luminous pillar that pierced the twilight canopy. And the forest answered, not with the adder's violent roar, but with a profound, assembling silence. The trees around the clearing seemed to lean in. The air stilled. From every trunk, every branch, every leaf, a soft green luminescence kindled. Thousands upon thousands of gentle lights, like grounded stars, illuminating the clearing in a spectral, beautiful daylight. Hereward froze, his sword still raised, his face a mask of stunned terror. His men fell to their knees, whimpering. This was not the terrifying fury of the bog. This was something older, grander, more serene, and infinitely more powerful. It was the forest witnessing.
It was the Green Man, not us, a manifested spirit, but us, the conscious totality of the wild, declaring this place under its direct, observant gaze. Cillian, his hand still in the sacred hearth, felt no pain, only connection. He was a conduit. He turned his gaze to Hereward. The land rejects your story, Theg. It offers no fight, only witness. Your hatred is a tiny, cold thing in a universe of living light. Put it down. Hereward's arm trembled. The sword wavered. He looked from Cillian's illuminated, peaceful face to the terrified men behind him, to the countless watching lights in the trees that surrounded them with silent, judgmental grace. The last prop of his madness, the belief that his enemy was a thing he could conquer, that his struggle had meaning in the face of the vast, indifferent wild, was kicked away. With a choked, strangled cry that was half sob, half surrender, Hereward dropped his sword.
It clattered on the stone, a dull, final sound. He did not look at it. He stared at his own empty hands, then up at the luminous trees, and a great, shuddering breath escaped him, the breath of a man waking from a long, fevered nightmare, to find the world utterly, irrevocably changed. He turned, and without a word to his men, he stumbled back into the darkness from which he came, broken not by violence, but by the overwhelming, silent pressure of a truth too large for his hatred to withstand. His men scrambled after him, leaving their weapons, their pride, everything on the forest floor. The silver-green light slowly faded. The forest's luminescence dimmed to its normal, sleeping state. The chorus returned, a soft, sighing lullaby of night insects and rustling leaves. Cillian removed his hand from the stone. The ember was cold. The rowan carving stood, simple wood once more. The embassy was closed. He stood alone in the clearing, the torque at his feet, next to the discarded sword. He felt emptied, scoured clean. He had offered himself, and in return had been filled with a peace that was not his own, but belonged to the land itself. The story had ended, not with a death, but with a relinquishment. The last turning was complete. He picked up his rowan guardian and walked slowly back down the deer trail, toward the lights of the hollow, toward a future he had bought not with blood, but with an unwavering choice to stand us a bridge between worlds, and, in doing so, to remind a broken man that some fires are too small to burn in the face of an ancient, patient, and luminous green dawn. The sapling years. The years that followed the last turning were not marked by the dramatic crescendo of conflict, but by the quiet, persistent work of regrowth. In the hidden hollow, life deepened its roots. The people, no longer living under the specter of Hereward's fire, did not erupt into celebration. Instead, a profound, grateful solemnity settled over the valley, a sense of hard-won peace that demanded stewardship. Cillian remained. The offer of the monastery of Brother Cillian was a closed book. He built a small round house at the edge of the clearing, its walls woven from willow and its roof a living mat of sod and wildflowers. He was neither chief nor priest, but the Fairn Queennae, the man of memory. His primary tool was no longer the chisel for deception or the thorn for wrath, but the knife for truth-telling. He began the great carving. On a vast interior wall of the meeting lodge, using dies made from berries, moss, and minerals, and with blades of flint and iron, he chronicled the story. He did not carve a simplistic tale of good and evil. He depicted the monastery cell, the desperate face in the oak. He showed Nessa's wise, wrinkled visage. He rendered Hereward not as a monster, but as a man of hard angles and cold eyes, trapped in a story of ownership. The burning of the bog was shown in all its terrible, cleansing fury. The final scene was not of victory, but of the luminous forest and a man dropping his sword, his figure small and broken against the witnessing trees. It was a history, a warning, and a scripture of coexistence. Children of the Hollow would sit before it for hours, and Cillian would tell the story behind each image.
He taught them the old names for plants and places, not as secrets, but as a birthright. He taught them the simple, persuasive crafts, how to ask the nettle not to sting, how to encourage the berry bush to fruit. The green man's power was not to be summoned for parlor tricks, he warned, but respected as the weather is respected. He had been a bridge in a time of crisis. Now his role was to keep the bridge strong through daily, mindful practice. Eogan became the hollow's chief guide and guardian, his knowledge of the true wood now augmented by the hard lessons of war. He led hunting parties that took only what was needed, and always with thanks. He married a woman from the hollow named Myred, and their first child, a son, was placed in Cillian's arms at his naming ceremony. The old carver, his hands now etched with more lines than any of his works, felt a surge of a different kind of creation, a connection to a future he had helped ensure. Beyond the hollow, the world shifted in subtle, significant ripples. Lord Hereward did not return to his hall. He was found weeks later by a hunting party from a neighboring shire, wandering the fens far to the east, muttering about the green light and watching trees. His mind had broken under the weight of the forest's silent judgment. He was taken in by a distant, pious cousin and lived out his days in a quiet monastery cell, a different kind of prisoner, tending a small herb garden with trembling, obsessive care. His name faded from the rolls of powerful thegns, becoming instead a local cautionary tale, a bogeyman mothers used to warn children against arrogance. Don't be a Hereward, or the green woods will take your wits. His abandoned hall did not stand empty for long. The people from the outlying settlements, those who had suffered under his harsh rule, cautiously approached. They found the stone church still embraced by hawthorn, oak, and oat, now fully mature, a holy grove in its own right. They did not try to clear it. Awe had replaced ambition. They moved into the hall, but they did so differently. They repaired it with reverence, and they left the green chapel untouched. A new custom was born. On the first day of spring, they would leave simple offerings, a sheaf of grain, a clay cup of milk, at the edge of the living chapel, not to a named god, but to the spirit of the place. The site became known as Glen on Coinel, the glen of the candle, for the way the morning sun would ignite the oak leaves with a green-gold fire. At the monastery, the abbot Wilfrid, aged and shaken by the events, quietly retired. The new abbot, a younger, more pragmatic man, found the strange leafy corbel carved by Cillian in the storeroom. Instead of destroying it, he had it placed high in the refectory, a silent, enigmatic witness to meals. He never spoke of its origin, but the brothers noted he was far less eager to clear woodland for new fields, and often spoke in sermons of God's presence in all growing things. Nessa, the old lay sister, passed away in her sleep one winter, a smile on her face. In her herb garden, where she had whispered to Cillian of keys and doors, a rowan sapling sprang up with impossible speed, its berries blazing scarlet each autumn. And the green man? He did not appear again in full, towering manifestation. His work was done, but his presence was diffused, potent, and perennial. He was in the impossible speed with which the scars of the burnt bog healed, new mosses and cotton grass weaving a vibrant tapestry over the ash within a few short years. He was in the uncanny wisdom of the herd beasts in the new community at Glen and Coinel, who would avoid certain thickets as if guided by an unseen hand. He was in the deep, resonant vitality of the true wood, which seemed to breathe with a more conscious peace. Killian felt him most strongly at the turning points of the year. On the eve of Bedtime, the air would hum with a fecund promise. At Samhain, the veil felt thin, and the whispers from the yew grove were especially clear. The guardian had returned to his primordial state, less a character in a story and more a condition of the world, the very principle of cyclical, resilient life. One spring, a decade after the last turning, a small party arrived at the hidden entrance to the hollow. They were not Saxons, but monks from a distant monastery in the land of the Scots. They had heard whispers, fragments of a story, about a holy man who conversed with the spirit of the wood, who had turned back wrath with peace. They came seeking wisdom, not conquest. Killian, his hair now more white than brown, received them. He showed them the great carving. He walked with them to the heart tree, though he did not enter the circle himself. He let the forest speak for him. The monks, men of learning and faith, were not converted to a new religion, but they left with a deepened understanding, a conviction that the Creator's voice could be heard in the rustle of leaves as clearly as in the pages of a psalter. They carried the essence of the story and the image of the leafy face back to their own land, where it would take root in a different soil. Killian watched them go, leaning on a staff of seasoned oak. He thought of the single seed that becomes a forest. His carving had been that seed. It had grown into a war, a peace, and now a story that was beginning to travel. He was not its owner, merely its first gardener. The sapling years were over. The story was becoming a tree, and its branches were reaching farther than he had ever dreamed. His life, once so small and conflicted, had been grafted onto something ancient and vast. He felt a contentment that was not personal happiness, but the satisfaction of a tool that has been used well for a purpose greater than itself. The legacy was no longer his to shape. It was his to nurture and then to let go. The face in the stone. 5 generations later, the world had changed in ways Killian could scarcely have imagined. Kings rose and fell. New faiths took root with fervor, their stone cathedrals rising taller than the highest oak. Towns grew where forests once stood. The language of the hollow was now a secret tongue, spoken only in the hearths of a dwindling few. The class non-dine was no longer a hidden refuge, but a known, if remote, village called Derrynafin, the oak grove of Fionn, its origins shrouded in benign myth. Yet the story persisted. It had weathered the centuries like a river stone, smoothed and shaped by countless retellings. It was no longer a precise history, but a tapestry of motifs. The zealous lord became a generic black baron. The wise crone became 3 fairy sisters. The miraculous growth of the church became a tale of saints, with the hawthorn said to bloom on Christmas Day.
The Green Man himself underwent a transformation. He was no longer the specific speaking guardian of the deep wood. He was an archetype, a symbol. His face, with its peering eyes and foliage-spewing mouth, was found carved in the stone of the new cathedrals, a pagan holdover tucked amidst saints and gargoyles, tolerated as a symbol of God's creation, or perhaps forgotten by the masons who copied it from older patterns, a ghost in the granite. In Derrynothin, the old lodge with the great carving had long since returned to the earth. But the story was told still, by the fire on long winter nights. An old man, his face as wrinkled as the bark of the great heart tree that still stood in the forbidden gully, would tell it to the children. And so, he would say, his voice like dry leaves, the Green Man, he didn't fight with sword or shield. He just was. And his being was so big, so old, that the Baron's hatred was like a spit in the ocean.
The carver, the rememberer, he stood his ground. And when the Baron looked up, he didn't see an enemy. He saw the whole world green and alive and watching him, and his anger just dried up and blew away. "Is the Green Man still here, Granda?" a child would inevitably ask, eyes wide. The old man would smile, a gap-toothed grin. "Look around you, Astorine. Where does the apple on your plate come from? Who pushes the daisy through the crack in the flagstone? Who paints the leaves in autumn? He's not a he anymore. He's the is, the turning of it all." One autumn, a young scholar from a university in the lowlands came to Derrynothin. He was collecting folklore, digging for the authentic pagan past before it vanished entirely. He heard the old man's story and, with the hubris of academic certainty, dismissed it as a charming pastiche of Christian allegory and nature worship. But he was intrigued by the mention of the face in the stone at the nearby ruins of Glen on Coinel. He hired a local boy to guide him there. The hall was a grassy mound, the Saxon timber long rotted. But the stone chapel, or what was left of it, remained. It was a breathtaking sight. The original limestone blocks were now barely visible beneath a magnificent, tangled sculpture of living wood. The hawthorn had grown into a giant, its thorns like ivory daggers, its trunk engulfing the cornerstones. The oak was a patriarch, its roots lovingly cradling the altar stone before plunging into the earth. The wild oats were gone, but a carpet of soft shamrock green moss covered the floor where the nave would have been. It was not a ruin. It was a collaboration, a dialogue between human intention and vegetative will that had spanned centuries. And there, on a surviving lintel stone, partly obscured by a filigree of ivy, the scholar saw it. A carved face, the mouth open, from which stone vines and stone leaves spiraled outwards, weaving around the later living ivy, so that it was impossible to tell where the carving ended and the plant began. The style was crude, powerful, unmistakably ancient. It was not a saint. It was the fear glass. The scholar's skepticism evaporated. He reached out, not to touch, but to trace the air above the worn features. This was no allegory. This was a record,
A whisper from a time when the boundary between the human and the natural world was not a wall, but a whispering curtain. He sat there until dusk. As the wind moved through the oak leaves with a sound like a long, satisfied sigh. He felt a presence, not a person, but a patience, an endurance that made his books and theories feel like dust. He returned to his university, but he never published a paper on the Green Man of Gleninchoinel. The experience had defied categorization. Instead, he changed his field of study to botany. He would, in later years, take his own students on walks in the woods, teaching them to see the forest not as a collection of resources, but as a community, a story still being told. Meanwhile, in a quiet workshop in Derrynafin, a young woman with clever hands and her great-grandfather's stories in her heart took up a piece of seasoned apple wood. She was not carving for a lord or a church. She was carving for the joy of it, for the memory in her blood. As her knife shaped the wood, a face began to emerge. Leaves curled from the hair. The eyes held a hint of dappled light. She didn't know she was remembering Killian or the original Oakhead. She only knew that this face, this green man, felt true. It felt like home. She placed the finished carving on her windowsill, where the morning sun would strike it. Outside, the first frost of the year was silvering the grass, a prelude to the sleep that would make the next spring's awakening all the sweeter. The cycle continued. The story was told, forgotten, remembered, reshaped. The face appeared in wood and stone, in story and song, sometimes revered, sometimes unnoticed. The specific truths of the past, the names, the dates, the exact shade of terror in Hereward's eyes, were lost. But the essential truth remained, encoded in the symbol itself. That life is a resilient, interconnected force, that humanity is not the master of the green world, but a part of its story, and that sometimes the most powerful magic is not to dominate, but to remember, to witness, and to endure. The green man was no longer a guardian in the wood. He was the wood. He was the leaf, the root, the stone embraced by the root, the story told by the fire, the hand that carved the story, and the quiet, understanding heart that heard it. He was the perennial, patient, green heart of the world, forever bringing the new season, one turn at a time.